just because it's a great profession. It's one that I enjoy, but it is boy, it can be demanding. Boy, can it be demanding. So, Lactoid brother, looks like you're muted. I'll unmute you
What's
if
up,
you don't.
dude?
Oh, you muted yourself, so I can't unmute you.
What's up, dude? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
What's up, man? Am I coming through okay? Is it picking up the right microphone? Probably
Uh,
should be.
I don't know if it's the right microphone. It's definitely a microphone I can hear, so that
Okay,
works.
well that's a
If,
look.
uh,
That's a good lawyer answer. Let me just
it,
double check.
yeah, I'm
That's the
I'm
right one.
pretty sure I'm pretty sure that if it's the wrong microphone, chat's gonna be
All right.
all over the place.
How you doing? I got Nicki Minaj in the background. That's a new
Mm.
addition. That'll be around for a little bit. I hope it's not too tacky.
No, no. I mean, look at you. You got your beer. You got your poster. You're staying classy. Look,
Yeah.
you look like you're in a warm environment. I look like I've been shoveling snow for fucking a week now.
I got the heat up. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
All right.
nice.
The chat seems to be pleased with your mic volume, Mike. So
Good.
I think we're all right here.
Excellent. Excellent.
So, so how have you been, man? It's been. I think we used to chat all the time. And it feels like it's been ages.
Yeah, no, it's been a little bit, but I mean, you've been moving on to bigger and better things, Ryan. I saw your performance, Word War. Very good. Very impressed.
Oh,
Um, hmm
uh, I mean, look, man. I took that seriously. I thought it was an interesting platform, and I wanted to come in prepped, and I was very pleased with the result. So we'll put it that way. Anytime I can have a debate with Pisco, and then he accuses the judging of being rigged, I feel pretty good about how it went.
That was a popular vote too, right? Like amongst the people who were
Yeah,
watching.
it's just anyone watching, anyone could vote online. You figure somebody who has 27 times my subs. Back then, I think it was like 50 something times my subs.
Oh,
Would probably have an edge in a popular vote, but you know, anyway, he feels it was rigged. But that's life. But
stop
maybe
the
we'll
count.
yeah. I haven't done that to anyone yet. I've been toying with it. Like if someone's like, well, that's like bullshit. It's like, well, do you think 2020 was a fair election? And they're like, because I mean, what's the standard that we're applying here? Like, do you
Sure.
have some evidence that this was a rigged vote? Like, what are we talking about?
Yeah.
Um,
Georgia was counted. It seems fair. Seems right.
yeah, it's being recounted right now, apparently. Well, so maybe we'll start there. Birthright citizenship, because part of the reason I wanted to chat with you again is that we're both originalists. We both stan originalism.
Yeah,
I think
smart
we
boy.
have we've recently seen, and maybe we'll do birthright citizenship first, but tariffs is another interesting one.
Oh
That
yeah.
originalism is not like one size fits all. There are actually variations within like the category, right? And I know that like you were a little skeptical of the birthright citizenship argument leading into it. I don't know if you've changed your mind or if you're still
I'm
skeptical,
still
but
skeptical.
where did you land on that one?
So I want to be very clear, and this is not I'm not glazing you here. I did
Mhm.
think you did a very good job at explaining really I think what the converse of my position is because um, it sounded very convincing, and I really haven't heard too many people make it sound convincing, frankly. You're maybe the only one I can think of off the top of my head who made an argument where it's like, oh, I guess I can really sort of see
Mhm.
the point that you're coming from. Um, I think the reason for me why, because for me, like the original intent of the drafters is paramount when it comes to
Mhm.
interpreting the text. I know there's sort of different schools of originalism here, but that's really the one that I think is most consistent with democracy generally, but also most consistent with uh, rule of law, right? What law is supposed to mean as a concept. And so when I think back to the times of the 14th Amendment. Um, 1868, we just kicked the shit out of the Confederacy. And what was the prevailing understandings of the time? What did they think when they were? What sort of scenarios were they imagining when they were putting together the 14th Amendment? So I think that the first concession, straightforward, obviously the main intent of the 14th Amendment was to provide slaves, former freed slaves, citizenship. That is
100%. That's inarguable.
inarguable. That
Yeah.
was the primary thrust, right? But what it's where, and maybe you can correct this, but what I see that to be is that going back even further, there was an understanding that anybody born under the rule, the lands of the king, under the UK, was considered a subject of the king. And when we declared independence, yeah, we rejected the king. Great, hell yeah, boo
Hmm.
monarchy. We did borrow a lot of concepts though, and a lot of understandings. And between our independence and the 14th Amendment, I have not been able to find a single example of somebody born within the territory of the United States that wasn't considered to be a U.S. citizen, except for black people, primarily slaves. That
Hmm.
is the exception. And there's I forget exactly what it is, but there's some law in this that I remember. And how I interpret the 14th Amendment is, yes, the goal was to give citizenship to former slaves, but the understanding was we're going to apply what we already apply to everybody else to the former slaves, right? We have this concept that we're already following, that we've already been following for a long time, and we're going to apply this to this group of people that we've had this exception for however many years. Um, and I think this interpretation. The reason why I guess it makes intuitive sense to me is, first of all, again, the fact that um, the concept of an illegal immigrant didn't really exist at the time, and I can't think of a single example. And I did watch your debate, and if I remember correctly, I think there was one example you brought up that was close, of somebody arriving on Ellis Island who was a non-citizen, and I think that was the best example. That was like probably the most moving example you gave. You can elaborate a little bit more on that if you recall the details as we sit
Hmm.
here. But but I can't think of an example of it not being applied to somebody born within the territory of the United States, even if they just walked in, even if they were a non-citizen, um, even if they walked in against the law.
So I think you touched on
A
some
lot
of
of
the
it.
strongest arguments on the other side, which
Okay.
is we did obviously import quite a bit of English common law. Um, the question is, did we import the English conception of jus soli or not, or did we Americanize it at some point, right? And I do think that the other point that's really strong in terms of an originalist argument, and I think, and again, you gotta be consistent with your application of judicial principles. If you're an originalist, you have to concede that there are strong arguments here, and one of the very very strongest is that in 1866, 1868, when it was drafted and ratified, there was no such thing as an illegal immigrant. It didn't exist as a category. So it's very difficult to say that the founders, the ratifiers had that specific thing in mind when it didn't even exist yet. Right. So I think that's a very strong starting point. Um, I guess like if I'm just like give you a few, like feed you a few little details, right? The one that really moved me was that I I didn't realize that this was all the 39th Congress, right? They're the ones who drafted it. It got ratified in 1868, but they drafted in 1866. And 2 months earlier, they had drafted the
The
Civil
Civil
Rights
Rights
Act of
Act.
1866,
Yep.
which said you don't get birthright citizenships if you are subject to a foreign power, right? So it was the same people. It was literally the same Congress. The idea that they somehow completely changed their mind about that, but then reenacted the Civil Rights Act in 1970 when they reenacted the enforcement acts of the Civil Rights Act, which has come up recently with like the Don Lemon stuff because it's the KKK Act, it's 241. It's when they passed all those things, those were providing enforcement provisions to the Civil Rights Act of 1866, which was then good law for 70 years before it was replaced. So they certainly it certainly felt like these people thought that if you were subject to a foreign power, you didn't get birthright citizenship necessarily. Now, what does that mean is another question. And then that leads into the examples. And it's an interesting question because you asked about prior to the amendment, which I actually don't have one top of mind. Post amendment, there are significant examples of, they're not court cases, it's executive practice where various immigrants came and they had children and they left, and then they asked, typically the Secretary of State, is my child a citizen? And they would say no. Or that one case, Miss Devereaux, who came to, the Irish woman who was in the boat and she gave birth in New York, and then they said no, you and your kid get out of here.
That's a very powerful example.
Yeah, there have certainly been some counter examples, and what's really interesting about that is that the policies of like universal birthright citizenship didn't really solidify till the FDR era. Like the idea that it was like we were just going to, like the idea that there was a uniform practice didn't start till between the 20s and the 40s. You can dicker about the date because we did some weird stuff. Like we had the Mexican guest worker program and then we kicked them all out. Like, does that count as like a counterexample or not? Like some people would say yes, some people would say no. But it was somewhere in like the Wilson FDR era that this universal practice began. Not that that's a legal argument. It's just kind of more of like a, you play this fun game where you're like, can I trace this horrible policy back to Wilson or FDR? And the answer is always yes. So that's, it's kind of a fun, just
I got a lot of gripes with FDR.
Just a fun historic anecdote. Yeah, so I think that is the, and if you look at Trump's brief, and I'll stop monologuing, one of the interesting bits is they came to the same conclusion I did, which is that the EO says that you get no birthright citizenship if the mother's here temporarily or illegally, and the father doesn't have status. Temporarily has all kinds of historic evidence. There's like scholarly works. Black's Law Dictionary agrees with it. Constitutional scholar, like everybody has a lot to say about temporarily. Illegally, not so much, because illegally didn't exist as a category. So the argument there is purely logical, right? Like like if you believe X, you should believe Y type argument, not historical, which is I think the strongest way to make an originalist argument. So I mean, is that a distinction that you buy, that there might be a difference between the temporary and illegal prongs of the executive order? Because we didn't know, there was no category of illegal at that time, but temporary was a category.
It's a very, and this is just an area that I have some ignorance in. So what is the delineating lines here with temporary? Do we know?
Well,
or is it
we don't know.
Yeah,
we don't know. And if the court goes that way, it would create a whole new area of litigation where it would just have to figure it out over time. Amy Swearer had this really cool example. I don't know if you remember it from the debate, but I do. Just to remind people that the question was, who can we draft into the military? And the answer was, if somebody owes allegiance to a foreign power, you can only draft them if they've signed a declaration of intent that they want to renounce their citizenship and become American, which is kind of a, it shows both political allegiance and it also shows that you're not here temporarily, that you're here permanently and you're trying to remain because you're trying to be an American. So I think things of that nature, right? Temporarily would I think go a long way. If you were on a student visa, I would say that's temporary. If you're here on like an H-1, I'd say that's temporary. Query, if you're here illegally, I think you'd have to be here a long time illegally before you weren't temporary. Like if you were here 5 years illegally, I think, yeah, some are for sure. But even if you're here, where I think temporary wouldn't, like, but for example, like a weird case would be like the refugees, like the TPS cases, where people have been here for like 20 years, but it's a temporary program. Is that temporary within the meaning of the 14th Amendment? If assuming the court goes this way, not sure. I think there'll be a lot of litigation about stuff like that. And yeah, go
Um,
sub to Lactoid, everyone. If you haven't subbed to Lactoid, why
oh,
not? That's crazy.
no, I appreciate that. Um, yeah, I struggle with this one. Um, because again, we're kind of originalist thought process. I'm looking back and uh, no concept of illegal immigration, right? But there
Mm-hmm.
is, there is this concept of temporary, passing through. But um, you know, illegal immigration specifically, not really a thing that anybody's thinking about at the time. So I want to address. I'm just the way I'm thinking about this. I just want to go from like beginning to
Mm-hmm.
kind of onward. The Civil Rights Act of 1866. You're right. It's the same people, right? This is actually one of the main arguments in the Dobbs decision, which
Mm-hmm.
is that the same people, or a lot of the same people, maybe not all the same people, but a lot of the same people and a lot of the same political structures that were in place, that was behind the 14th Amendment, was also behind a lot of America's early abortion bans that started coming into
Mm-hmm.
place in the late 1800s and early
Yeah.
1900s. And that there's historical evidence here that why would the same people uh, also be in favor of the 14th Amendment that protected abortion and then go on to ban abortion? It just doesn't make any sense from just reading into it. What the intention of the framers was doesn't make any sense. So you're pointing to the 1866 Civil Rights Act, which is more specific,
Mm-hmm.
saying if you're subject to a foreign power, um, then no. But and then we have the constitutional amendment that comes afterwards, and so, or I guess it gets ratified afterwards. So what subject to a foreign power means, I think, is already sort of ambiguous. And I remember a huge part of your debate was, and I think this is the part that I thought was most difficult, I think, for you to prove, but then also Pisco to,
Mm-hmm.
I guess, argue against, because this is like a very strange, kind of difficult concept to navigate, which is how much does the parent status transmit to the children, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, um, because obviously somebody coming over to America, it wouldn't make sense, uh, to be talking about birthright as it applies to them because they're already born. Obviously, no one's talking about that. We're talking about birthright in the sense of people born within the territory of the United States. And so, there's one interpretation is, well, this would mean people born within the United States that are immediately subject to a foreign power, such as the children of invading armies, such as the children of Native American tribes, such as the children of diplomats, where they can be recalled at any time. They can be they can be pulled out and drafted, or in the
Mm-hmm.
case of invading armies, they're already part of the army, and they're subject to those laws, and not really subject to American laws in the sense that we mean, right? We're either fighting them or we have treaties with them, but they're not really under our law in the same sense. So when it says subject to a foreign power, to me, I think a strong argument is that that is referring to the three exceptions, right? Invading armies, Native American tribes, and the children of diplomats. I think that much is clear. Whether that applies to anybody born in the United States who happens to be of parents of a different country, that's, I think, a little bit more difficult. Um, when you look at a map of all the countries in the world that have birthright and all the ones that don't, there is a stark distinction between the old world and the new world. And
Well,
I
there
think
was.
there still is.
Oh, go because I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead.
No, you're good. So right now there is this very firm distinction. When you look at right now, you can just
Mm-hmm.
look at a map between the New World and the Old World, and I think a lot of that has to do with the colonial history of, what is the interest of colonial nations? It is to survive in a wilderness, in a strange land, and you got to attract people, right? You got to bring in people, and what better way to do that than, and plenty of examples in American history where we did that, right? Where we were handing out land for free for basically anybody that move onto it, um, for an extended period of time as we were colonizing the West. But at the beginning, uh, would it make more sense that the drafters of both the Civil Rights Act of 1866 and the same people who again drafted the 14th Amendment, and I know I'm rambling a little bit, but would it make sense for them to uh, kind of part with what's already been happening for all this time, and then kind of come up with this and intend to apply a relatively novel concept, which has not yet been happening, of not giving citizenship to people born on the soil of the United States, absent Native Americans, invading armies, or the children of diplomats. And that's the hardest sell for me, right? That's the hardest sell for me.
Yeah, so it's interesting though because I I think that the argument you're making kind of reaches back into this English common law pool, and I do think, like, if you look at Wong Kim Ark, the decision, well, the dicta of the decision spends substantial time discussing English common law and why the court believes that English we did adopt the English common law in this regard, and I actually do think that's dispositive. If you don't if you think we wholesale adopted English common law, it's very hard to see how it's possible that the draft framers meant something different than that, right? So I think that is step one: is you need to displace English common law. Now, English common law here is very weird because it was a law of subjecthood. It was not a law of citizenship. It was a law of subjecthood. You could not expatriate. If you were a subject of the British king, you could never stop being a subject of the British king. There was no out. It was, blood in, blood out, as it were, right? Um, which makes the American Revolution somewhat contrary to, let's just say, in significant tension with the concept of perpetual subjecthood, right? Because everyone in America was a perpetual subject of the king. And one of the things that they really wanted to do around this time was create the right to expatriate, which they did. I forgot the year, but they did pass a law allowing you people to expatriate if they so chose. And I think that this is the sort of thing that I don't know that we wholesale abandoned, but that we adopted a unique American conception of, right? Because we have so many unique American things like Indian tribes. There's no Indian tribe exception in English common law, right? It just there couldn't be because like the idea of quasi sovereign subject states it's just a uniquely American
It is,
problem.
yeah.
And
Independent nations.
the thing about the complete allegiance theory is it makes all the exceptions non-exceptions. Like, does an ambassador owe complete allegiance to the United States? Nope. Did a Native American? Nope. Does an invading army? Nope. Like, these are all non-exceptions under the complete allegiance doctrine. So like all of the, like, and particularly the Native American one, I think is telling because it is uniquely American and it has to be just a freestanding exception on the alternative view because it has no root in English common law.
Right.
It's just like, well, this is a thing, they don't count, right? But clearly they were subject to the territorial jurisdiction of the United States. Like, you could, if a Native American walked into a town in Massachusetts and like assaulted someone and robbed a bank, like, you certainly could prosecute them. So
Well,
like,
we could have foreigner too, though, right?
sure, but so why does the foreigner get birthright citizenship under the universal birthright citizenship rule, but not the Native American? If all that we're doing is asking who do we have territorial jurisdiction over,
Right.
right? It's an accepted exception, but under the complete allegiance version, the Native American thing would make total sense. Like, you also couldn't charge them with treason because they don't owe allegiance to the United States.
So my understanding, and I believe this to be the case, is that even prior, I believe it was 1923 something that we finally passed the Indian Citizenship Act, where we,
Yeah, 23, 24. I can't quite, somewhere in
yeah,
there. Yeah.
somewhere in the 20s. Even before then, a Native American who was to give birth to a child outside the reservation, they were considered citizens if they were on like official American soil. That was my understanding of it. If I'm wrong on that, then I'll just eat being wrong on that. But if that is the case, um, I think that's actually a little bit of a strong argument that cuts against your current argument because, yeah, Native Americans born on the reservation, because the whole idea is what is the reservation, and this is even the case now. Reservations they're American kind of. They're not really. They're considered dependent nations in that they are separate nations, but they're under treaties of the United States where they are stripped essentially of all autonomy when it comes to negotiating with any kind of outside power. And the how they're governed is dictated by the treaties that we've signed with them, with the federal government. So they're not under the state. They're not really even under the Constitution. They're under the treaties of the United States. And this is why, for example, they can, you know, technically they're not even under the 14th Amendment in terms of they can racially discriminate. They often do in terms of their, citizenship requirements or other things that they do, with like very explicitly when it comes to blood quantum, for example. And so, they aren't they are not subject to the Constitution. They're not subject to our jurisdiction, but they are subject to the treaties that we signed with them, which put them in a purely subordinate role. And so, under that theory, I think it actually does make sense that if they're born in the Native American reservation, you could argue that they're sort of born in a different country.
Yeah.
And it doesn't sound very intuitive, but they were born in a different country, and so we didn't really give them citizenship until Congress decided to sign an act that gave them citizenship, even the ones that were born on the reservation. But it would also make sense then that under birthright, then just like anybody from any other nation, assuming that birthright is of course good law, that if a Native American like a woman was to go over in off the reservation and give birth to a child, then that child would be a U.S. citizen.
I
So
don't I don't think that was the case, though I'm
okay,
not entirely sure. And the reason I'm not entirely sure is that Elk v. Wilkins did not actually go directly to that point. Like the
right.
question was
I
like,
read that case a little while ago. I can't remember it though.
yeah, it was because my recollection of Elk, and I'm not in debate prep mode anymore, so the details are not quite as strong as
I'm
they
I'm
used to
I'm
be.
not going to hold your feet to the fire. It's
Yeah,
not.
yeah, it was not that kind of conversation. But I think that the question there was like, if he renounces his tribal status, can he become American? And the answer was no. He'd have to naturalize like anybody else. I mean, I do know that like the dominant issue, like when they were, if you read like the floor debates when they were talking about the 14th Amendment and you're talking about the Civil
I
Rights
read
Act
a
of
lot of those.
1966, yeah, how to exclude Indians was like the main topic of
Yeah,
conversation.
it was.
That was
There's a
like,
lot of that. Yeah.
yeah, like 90% of the interact, they're like, it's like, if guys, if you ever read this, the his take a U.S. common law class, it's literally the history of American racism. That's just what constitutional law is. And yeah, they were sitting around being like, how do we exclude these people? We gotta make sure the language is there, because I know that in the Civil Rights Act of 1966, they said they excluded Indians not taxed, right? And then there was some concern where they were like, well, what if they pay taxes? Like, does that would include them? So they definitely seemed to be attempting to exclude them fully, but I don't know that I have the 100% factual analysis to give you on that, like off the top of the dome, as it were. I don't think they got birthright citizenship is my answer, but
So you might be right on this. So I'm looking into this a little bit more because I remember I read into this a while ago and I came away with that conclusion, but that might have not been actually as it was uh, effectuated, because there are some cases that and I have read parts of these. I'm
mm,
not going to be able to give you the details, but there are some early cases where a lot of the language is really talking about, hey, technically these people were born on foreign soil, right? They're living on foreign
mm,
soil. They're born in foreign soil. Um, but um, and under that logic, it would make perfect sense to me that if they were born on non-reservation land, if they were born outside of the nation, outside of the foreign country, within the territory of the United States, then they should be a citizen under the 14th Amendment, assuming that birthright is the law. But I think it's an argument in your favor, actually, if they weren't. Um,
yeah. My understanding is they weren't. I certainly haven't seen a case to the contrary, but nor have I seen, like, Elk is the closest, and I don't think Elk's directly on point. So I don't think it's like a case the other way either. And I'm not the other thing that's weird about this is that it gets really tricky because there were also like a patchwork of statutes in play, right? So then it's like to find the test case, it would have to be an a Native American child born on U.S. land who did not have a like presumably white U.S. father, right? Which is already kind of a corner case. And then they'd have to be doing that, but not benefiting from one of the treaties that did give citizenships to pockets of Native Americans in certain circumstances. And if you weren't benefiting from those treaties, why are you not on the reservation? Considering
Right.
like the state of America back then. And then it would have had to be documented somehow. So it's also like totally possible that we just don't have, like, it's totally possible that case just didn't arise, is I guess what I would say. Like,
Yeah.
it's a little bit of a corner case because, and just this is more for the chat than you because I know you know this. One of the oddities about birthright citizenship, we talk about it all the time, but Congress passes all kinds of laws that give citizenship well beyond what the Constitution requires. Like if you were born and your parents were in England or Germany or something, and you're a citizen of the United States, it's not because of the 14th Amendment. It's because Congress passed a law. So, there's all kinds of other ways that you can get birthright citizenship.
Yeah, I wish there was a case. I really wish, as is usual, I really wish there was a case that really specified that question, where you had a Native American, who
Mm-hmm.
his parents were from the reservation. They were lived off the reservation for a non-temporary period of time. For, let's say, they lived in some town for 20 years, and then they gave birth to somebody. Would that person be considered a U.S. citizen? Um, to me, if the 14th Amendment does grant birthright, it should clearly, and so that's why I wish there was a specific case in that. But I guess this is just one of the kind of the vague oddities that we have to deal with
Yeah.
when it comes to
I mean,
interpreting
I
this.
think the answer is no, but I'm just not 100% on it. So I'm going to have to dig into Ms. Swearer's research again and see if she
Yeah.
had an answer to that question.
And hey, if your argument's just that much stronger, if that's not the case, I will admit that. And also I will admit I did read a lot of the argument on the floor. Uh,
Mhm.
there's a lot of it, so I didn't read all of it, but on the floor regarding the 14th Amendment. And you're right that there are, and during the debate, you did accurately cite, what was it? It was Trumbull, or it was between Trumbull and Howard, I believe, right? Where the
Yeah, Trumbull, Howard, Cohen, and Bingham
yes,
all had like Howard's the one that people like to nitpick, but like certainly Trumbull and Bingham had very, very clear statements about what they were trying to do.
right, but there was also a lot of disagreement
Hmm.
that really was never fully elucidated, unfortunately, as to what, if there was really a kind of consensus on
Hmm.
what everybody really was like. Oh yeah, that works. It felt a little bit more like an unresolved conflict when I was reading through it. Like, they were nitpicking each other as to some of the specifics about
Yeah.
what this meant. And one person would say, well, obviously we intend for it to mean this, and then somebody else would say, yeah, kind of, but I also, really it's about, what we've always intended it for it to mean.
So,
Okay,
so
that doesn't really help me. What did you always intend for it to mean? Can you please go into that? And of course, they don't enough, I think, to make it super clear. So
Well, this is the for those again those normies in the chat who don't speak legalese. Originalists typically disfavor legislative history, and this is why. Is that like when you read floor debates and you read, it's like imagine if you were reading a law today, like how it got passed, right? And someone's like, "We want to pass the Save Act," and then AOC stands up and is like, "You're racist. Everybody's racist. I used to bartend," and then Marjorie Taylor Greene jumps in, says something about space, like it's not necessarily useful is the problem, like, and you can interpret it a million different ways. With the Constitution, you can't really get away from it because what you're asked, you kind of have to ask the question about what was meant by the language. So even originalists will grant you that you should look at floor debates for constitutional amendments. It's just not, it's impossible to get away from. But I think I would have to concede that floor debates by definition almost always go both ways, right?
mhm.
Like, so I think that like what you do there, and this is why people hate it. You pick your friends, and if you're prepped, and it's weird that I'm still baffled by the fact that Pisco wasn't prepped with like counter quotes because they exist. But he wasn't for whatever reason. But you pick your friends and you come in with the best quotes that you can muster, and and make the argument there. But I do think it's interesting that the court thought the 14th Amendment did not apply to people who were subject to foreign powers until it decided Wong-Kim Ark. Like in elk and slaughterhouse cases, it was dicta, of course, but it was saying it said what Trumbull said, that this is, does not apply to people who owe allegiance to foreign nations, right? And then you can query what that means, but that's, and then they changed their mind in Wong-Kim Ark, I guess on the back of the English common law analysis. Though technically maybe they didn't, because it's not necessary to the holding. So I've always been curious about that. Like, why did the court have this view of the 14th Amendment immediately after it was passed that it then kind of modified later?
So I guess two questions for you. One is directly regarding that. Between 1868 and Wong-Kim Ark, which was what, 1898?
98, I think.
I believe.
Yeah, 98.
Okay. Between these two dates, was there an example of somebody being born in the United States, and this might be an example where we just don't have a case, but somebody being born in the United States to sit people who were not citizens and were subject to a foreign power, in the sense that they were arguably subject to a foreign power in the sense that they were citizens of a different country and not the United States citizens. Do we have an example of somebody being born and then denied citizenship?
Yeah, that's the practice of Secretary Bayard and the Secretary Frederick Friegelheisen. I can't pronounce his name. And then the Devereaux thing. That all happened.
That was before Wong-Kim Ark.
Devereaux, I'm not as certain of. Yeah, that was 1885 is when the two of the examples happened. And then Devereaux, I don't have the date in my kind of shitty version of my notes I have accessible right now. So, but I could track that down. So that those did happen in the interim, though of course they weren't court cases. They were executive determinations
that weren't challenged, though.
Not to my knowledge. No. I think that,
Wow.
So that's the oddity, right? Is that so? Then you have Wong-Kim Ark, and I think we both agree that if you read Wong-Kim Ark broadly, English common law incorporated, you're done, right? So then there's this question of whether you can read Wong-Kim Ark narrowly, because the holding of Wong-Kim Ark is like hyper precise, right? It says the single question stated at the beginning of the opinion, whether a child born in the United States of parents of Chinese descent who at the time of the birth are subject to the Emperor of China, but have a permanent domicile and residence in the United States and are there carrying on business, which meant that they were legal under the Chinese Exclusion Acts, and are not employed in any diplomatic or official capacity under the Emperor of China, becomes at birth a citizen in the United States. So if you, the needle that the Supreme Court would have to thread in order to limit birthright citizenship would, in my mind, they're not overturning Wong-Kim Ark. You're never going to get the votes for that. Like, it's not going to happen. I guarantee you it's not happening. I know Thomas and Alito will say sure, but
maybe.
Yeah. Thomas and Alito have been pretty. They've been on the warpath of late.
Maybe.
So, yeah, maybe. I'd say yes, but I'd bet on it, but we don't have to.
No, I'd bet on it.
Maybe.
Yeah.
But if they limited Wong-Kim Ark to its holding, they're like the reason they could still do Trump's executive order, because his parents were here legally and permanently, right? So like in that sense, it's on all fours.
This is my second question, though. This kind of goes along with that, because subject to a foreign power is a little bit vague, but if it reads what I think you would need it to read for it to bar illegal immigrants from having citizenship, I don't see why it wouldn't also bar people here from having citizenship if they were dual citizens or on a green card or on a, even, I guess, student visa. I think you already said before, yes, but I mean, why? Because all these, let's take the hardest example to deal with, like a dual citizen.
Mhm.
somebody who's citizen as a citizen of two different countries. Technically, by maintaining citizenship in a different country, would you say that they are maintaining an allegiance with a foreign power?
Yeah,
Arguably.
so this is a really fascinating question. If the court adopts the complete allegiance theory, I think that bodes poorly for dual citizens long term. If they adopt that theory, that seems like that might be a barrier to long term dual citizenship, frankly. Now, it asks some interesting questions that I don't know the answer to. Like, for example, if I'm a dual citizen of Israel and the US, for example, could I be drafted by both? Israel has compulsory military service. So you don't even need to be drafted. Could I be drafted in the US and forced to serve in Israel's military? Could I be
Potentially.
charged with treason by both countries? If so, then the answer might be that you owe complete allegiance to both. But that sounds like an oxymoron. Because like typically the markers of complete allegiance are like, is there anything, any duty that you owe this country that is missing? Anything that like a full citizen or a full, someone who fully owes allegiance to this country would have that you don't have, right? And like and treason and military service are the kind of like the obvious examples that come to mind when you talk about that. So I don't know that the answer to that question. Like my dad's a dual citizen, but he's a dual citizen with Britain, and the question of treason or military service has, quite frankly, never come up. So if the answer is yes, that you could be subject to compulsory military service in both places, then presumably you would still qualify as having complete allegiance. But that would be an interesting question that I'm sure would be litigated. Like
It,
it's not like that's just a off the cuff answer, right?
no, that's fair enough. But I think that one of and it might this might just be the case because like as you know, I'm if the argument is leads to the conclusion and the law is
Mhm.
XYZ, then that is what it is, even if it's difficult to in fact we're sort of finding that out now regarding this recent tariffs case, right? There are some potential weird consequences that might come about, but it doesn't matter, right? If the law is what the law is, then we have to deal with whatever kind of ramifications come from that. And so I'll just give you an example. A close friend of mine growing up is a United States citizen and a
Mhm.
citizen of the country of South Korea. South Korea has mandatory military service for all citizens.
Yeah,
You get drafted, you have to do, I believe it's a year or 2 years or something, you have to do it.
yeah. It fucks with
Um,
all the StarCraft players.
it fucks with
They're
all the
they're
StarCraft players. Yes.
they're always taking time off. You know,
Look, that's why I knew so many Koreans. I was trying to go pro back in high school. Anyway, never made it, but I
that's a
did
tough game.
I did no, I did pretty good. I was in a few on the team, and I did a few tournaments, but nothing ever notable. But you meet a lot of Koreans, and he he went to go visit and stayed a little bit too long, and he got I think he got either like a letter or some kind of notice, and he had to get a plane that day to leave. Otherwise, they were going to get him. Like they
Mhm.
were going to make sure that he had to get drafted into the South Korean military, and he's a U.S. citizen, right? So he did have a duty. I guess the duty is if you're a citizen, like who. I guess the question is, well, within the borders of the country, I suppose, but this would be a duty of any citizen who happened to fulfill XYZ requirements. One of them being an adult, one of them, being a male, and one of them being within the borders. I don't
Mhm.
think that necessarily defeats the argument here, but he did have a duty, to uh, serve the South Korean military. So he has maintained that citizenship. So I think it's fair to say that he has some allegiance to South Korea. Um, would that mean and yeah, would that mean that he is subject to a foreign power? I would think so. So but despite the fact that he was born here and grew up here and lived his whole life here, and so I think that it would necessarily mean that if he had a child here in the United States, and that child,
Yeah.
if we're going to look at the 1866 at like the subject to a foreign power, if we're going to read that into being any kind of you know complete
Mhm.
jurisdiction of a foreign power, if we're going to read that to apply here, then not only would the kids of his kids not be citizens, but I think that if that's the logic the court uses, Congress has to pass legislation actually to make sure that doesn't happen, and they have to do it quick because this would mean that they couldn't be citizens, right? Like, because he's subject to a foreign power.
Yeah, well, that tees up a few interesting points. One is because technically, and this is like getting deep into like the Heritage Foundation. I guess not even Heritage Foundation anymore, because now Trump filed his brief and they adopted all the art. And I felt very vindicated. They adopted basically everything I said. They had some new stuff, but all the stuff I said they did basically. But the argument is that what they were meant by the 14th Amendment was complete jurisdiction, meaning political allegiance, right? And the 1866 language is evidence of them trying to find a way to say that. But I don't think, like, subject to foreign power is not the test of complete jurisdiction. It's
I see.
evidence for it, right? So the question is, are you subject to the complete jurisdiction, meaning do you owe political allegiance to the country? And in that framework, the question you're asking, I think, can be concept, and it's a good question, is could you have like a totally overlapping Venn diagram of allegiance, right? Where it's like you owe 100% allegiance to two countries and they overlap completely. That's why you're a dual citizen. Or does owing allegiance at all to another country, is it like
Is that enough?
they're separate circles, and if it has to transfer from one to the other, so you're like a 97.3% or a 50-50, but you can never be a
Right.
100-100, right? I think it would have to be that you could be 100% allegiance to both nations in that scenario, because otherwise, for example, like, I don't know every country's law, but in the US, you can't be charged with one of the elements of treason that they have to prove is that you owe allegiance to the country.
Right.
Because how could you be treasonous if you didn't owe the country allegiance?
Of course.
It's not right. So if you could be charged with treason in multiple countries, that would seem to signify that you owe complete allegiance to multiple countries. Now, does that make a lot of sense? I don't know. And I know, like, my sister recently was saying, like, "Oh, what if I did X, Y, and Z? I could get dual citizenship for her kid." And I was like, "I don't know if I want to put all my eggs in that basket and change your life around that right now, based on the way that America's doing geopolitics." Like, I feel like some of these relationships might be a little fragile because, like, dual citizenship implies a very stable world where countries never have interests adverse to each other,
Right.
right? And that's kind of like, this isn't law, this is just policy. But like, there's a reason, and again, not law, because I'm not, my view on the policy would not alter the 14th Amendment analysis. But there's a reason why all the countries in Europe abandoned birthright citizenship. It like doesn't it really doesn't work in an era of modern transportation. Like, the idea that there's like a cohort of Chinese citizens who live in China and have full American citizenship rights to do with as they please as our countries become increasingly adversarial
Birth
is weird.
tourism. Yeah,
Yeah, it's a very weird outcome,
it
right?
is.
Um, but it's gonna. I don't know. I don't. I think I was surprised at how much originalist evidence there is for the temporary point. The illegal point, I'm not. The government made some very good arguments. The brief is very well written, but I'm not really convinced on the illegal point, just because I think the counterpoint of, like, there was no such thing is just too. It's too strong. It's a
That's the
hard
part.
one.
Yeah, that's the part that
Yeah.
I keep getting caught up on. So
Yeah.
I wanted to lay my cards on the table because I don't want to be. I feel as though maybe I should have made this clear before, and I don't want to be perceived as hiding anything. Um, I don't know if you know this. I actually am a dual citizen as well,
Oh, that's fine.
and so now I was born in America. I would say I have complete allegiance to America. I speak English, and the other country that I'm a citizen of, Sweden, is in no which way any kind of geopolitical threat to the United States.
Mhm.
I don't think there's going to be ever a diplomatic row between the United States and our newfound NATO ally, the Kingdom of Sweden. Um, I don't feel. I don't feel. I'll be honest with you, and I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Consulate of Sweden. I don't really feel a lot of allegiance towards the country of Sweden. It's a
Yeah.
little bit more of an accident of birth in
Mhm.
terms of who, or where my ancestry is. And technically, according to Sweden, I am. According to Sweden, I owe them a level of allegiance, right? And if I lived there, I probably would, right? In the event of some kind of invasion of Sweden, and I was there, they would draft me, and they probably would have legal justification to do so. But um, I would feel like if I had to do that, I would feel like I'm fighting for a foreign military, right?
Yeah.
Deep down, right? And so this question of allegiance, right? Um, I think it's particularly difficult to parse out because there, if we're trying to develop like a legal standard for what allegiance means, I think that you're going down the right path in terms of like what kind of obligations do you have towards that
Mhm.
country. That is kind of the basis
Yeah.
for allegiance too.
It has to be, who do you owe allegiance to,
Mm,
not who do you feel
feel allegiance
allegiance
to.
to. Because this happened when
That's a good one. That's a good
I went
cue.
on Sarah's panel, right? And there was this fucking idiot named Clay that was like in the fucking hot takes that she does at the end. This dude, I mean, the dude's probably insane, but so I shouldn't get too far down that road. But he was making the argument that, like, as a conscientious objector, he doesn't owe America military service. And I was like, oh, no, no, no. You
You
owe
owe.
it. they,
You will be reminded of that fact if you choose
yeah,
not. Yeah, yeah.
in their grace, they may not hold you to it. They might give you an exception, but you owe it. And then
Yeah.
it's the country decides whether or not to be nice about it, right? Like you owe, like, and I think that's the interesting bit is, like, who do you owe this to?
Yeah.
And the reason that matters to me a great deal is, it's like, let me go with the temporary stuff, right?
Hmm.
Let's take like the most sympathetic example, and some people in my chat are going to disagree with this, but somebody's been here illegally for 20 years. They've had, multiple kids.
A
They've been,
dreamer, let's say.
no crimes, pay their local taxes to the extent they can, work hard, have built a life, blah blah blah. They're not like sending money back home to fund local terrorist groups or like whatever the fucking nightmare, like, it's not like some kind of big like Ponzi scheme. Like, what they're really doing is moving their family over here. They're trying to bring their life here. They never want to go back home, right?
Right.
Do they owe, I mean, you could make a pretty good argument that they owe allegiance to us. Now, the countervailing argument would be, could you charge them with treason? Could you draft them? I'm not sure, actually, because some of those things have legal ramifications to them, right?
Right.
Um, so I'm not positive, but I think that would be where the play in the joints is. Like, when do you start owing us allegiance? And if I was going to make the argument for the legal versus illegal distinction, I think where the government's going is, they're saying, we think that you need permanent domicile to not be temporary. That's what it means. And we don't think you can have it if you're doing it in contravenance of our laws.
If you're breaking the law.
Yeah, like, if you have no legal right to be here and you're claiming that you're here permanently, well, you're not here permanently. You're here you're here permanently because we didn't catch you, but, like, that's not like, it's like a squatter's right thing, not
Right.
so that seems to be the argument they're going for. Um, it's not without some force. I could see a justice or two biting on it, but the my problem with it is that if you read the brief and you read the section on temporary, they've got like 10 pages
Yeah.
of historic evidence, right? Because it's like scholar after scholar after scholar thought that it did not apply to temporary. Like, nobody, like, if there's a lot of evidence that historically
That's the
nobody
strongest
really
case.
thought this, right? Like, what was this Yale Law Review article that said, in this country, the alien must be permanently domiciled to get birthright citizenship. Henry Campbell Black said that, if you're a temporary sojourner, doesn't get birthright citizenship. People who are transiently don't get birthright citizenship. There's like, and the government compiled
Yeah.
an endless list of these constitutional scholars. Um, and then you get to the section on legal versus illegal, and they have none of that, right? At all, because it just doesn't, the category didn't exist. And
Right.
I think that's tricky. But if the court ruled, this is like I think what the court might do. They might say Wong Kim Ark is limited to its holding. We agree with President Trump regarding temporary. We disagree regarding illegal. We think illegal by itself is insufficient. But temporary is a broad term that could have a lot of meanings, and
It
we
encompasses
invite,
a lot of illegal
yeah,
immigrants.
it covers a lot of illegal. We invite some litigation about what that means,
Yeah.
right? I think they might go that way. It's a tough court to read though, and maybe I don't know if you want to segue, but uh, like the tariff case
Yeah.
was really instructive about how differently the justices view the law. And I don't know that the tariff case made, because it's more statutory than it is constitutional. It is somewhat constitutional, but it's more statutory. I don't know that the tariff case made me have a better understanding of how they're going to vote on birthright citizenship, but it certainly showed that, like, Gorsuch, Barrett, Kavanaugh, they do not view the law the same way. There are real differences within their philosophies.
Yeah. And I'm definitely cool segueing to that, but just, I have one more
Oh no,
question
no,
that's
please.
just burning. Do you think that do you think that the Civil Rights Act of 1866, when they talk about subject to a foreign nation, do you think, or a foreign power, do you think that's best read as subject to a foreign power instead of subject to us, or do they mean subject to a foreign power at all? Because
Yeah,
if you read it the first way, it would essentially just cover, um, wouldn't it just cover illegals? Or sorry, just I guess just not cover illegals.
yeah. So I think my best historic understanding is that, like, they just had to settle that question about who we can draft like
Okay,
3 years earlier,
fair. Yeah, that's
right? It was the same people who right. Like, this is the interesting part. Like, historically, it's like all the same guys, like writing
right,
all.
right.
So I think that's what they meant. Like, they meant, like, we need to know who is sufficiently ours, right? Who is sufficiently ours, and if you're not sufficiently ours, you don't count. And I think that was kind of an evolving area in a lot of ways, because a lot of these were novel questions. Like, I think when they did the draft during the Civil War, like, it was a big deal, and they had to figure this out because it just had never fucking occurred to any of them. Because you're like, yeah, the guy's English. It's English John. He
Yeah,
came over on a
he's one of
boat
us, of
like
course. Yeah,
15 years ago, right? And he's never going back. Like, who the fuck could afford to go back to England, right? Like,
who would want to go
he's
back?
here. Yeah, everyone's like, no, like, people weren't like just like traveling unless they were omega rich, right? So,
Right.
like, English John's just here. We're going to call him English John, and yeah, he's one of us. And then suddenly you go to draft English John, and he goes, actually, it turns out I am English, and I don't really want to fight in the Civil War. And, like, I think that was like people were like, wait, what? this this is we literally just have not had to deal with this scenario before. So I think it was an evolving area, but I think that seems to me what they were getting at. That seems to be at least the understanding of the time.
Okay. Fair enough. No, I think it's interesting. I'm looking forward to. I think that's going to be a either way, it's going to be a pretty big decision. Um, I going into it, I will say, and I'll be honest, I still think that they're going to lose, at least when it comes to illegal immigrants, especially the ones that have been here for a long time. But I, I thought that it was like a totally open and shut case when I first looked into it, but then, like I said, I did a little bit more looking into it. There's some arguments, and then I saw your debate, and that pushed me. I still am slightly, again, I think, as you mentioned, just because there really was no conception of illegal immigrants at the time. To me, that is a huge argument. I'm still over 50%. I think that birthright is still good law, but I am it's much closer than I was before. So yeah, there's good arguments. You make good arguments.
Yeah, that's kind of I had a similar arc. I started like 80% Trump loses, no shot. But that was not based off anything other than like historic practice. Where I was like, we've been doing this for 100 years. There's no way it changes, right? That was my that was definitely my vibe.
Right.
Um, when I started digging into it, I drank the Kool Aid a little bit because I was like really getting in the weeds. Um, I think I got down to 60-40 with Trump losing the more likely to lose. I think now
Not unreasonable.
I think he's more likely to win, but not on both. Like
Okay.
I think like winning on temporary, I think 60-40 Trump's favor.
Interesting.
Winning on illegal, I think probably 60-40 against. Like but it's going to be close. I think it's going to be an absolute nail biter
5-4.
because well, I am 100% positive about how Alito and Thomas are voting in my mind. Like
Well, and we
we
also
can,
know the three other ones. We
and they're
know
going to vote. They're going to be against,
always,
right?
no matter what.
Um, Barrett and Gorsuch and Kavanaugh are very influenced by historic arguments, is what I've seen from them. Like if you can give them an originalist history that they can buy, they like that. I think that's why I'm thinking, oh, you might be able to get a couple of those votes off of a compelling historic case. Um, I but it's going to be close. It's going to be a nail biter.
My guess is Gorsuch goes with the three liberal justices. I do. I think that Gorsuch is more willing to kind of be beholden to what he believes the text to mean.
Mhm.
Then you're right. I'm not saying he's not moved by historical analysis, of course not. But I just my prediction is that Gorsuch will vote with the three liberal justices. I can see Kavanaugh going with Alito and Thomas. Um, the others crapshoot. I'm not
Yeah,
sure.
yeah. It's gonna be that'd be if it broke the way you're describing. So you got 3-3,
Hmm.
right? Then
Well,
Gorsuch
four and
joins
three.
liberals, so it's 4-3,
Yeah.
right? So then it's like it's Barrett Roberts.
They
That's
both got to move over. They both got to get on board.
that'd be very interesting. And then the other question lurking is that there's also a statute that says the exact same thing as the 14th Amendment. So like there is a duplicative statute, right? So then like a lurking question is
I just didn't
if
know
the
that. I'll be
yeah
honest with
yeah
you. Holy crap! I
it,
had no idea. Wow.
if but it was passed. This is the weird bit. It was passed way later. I forgot the exact year, but it
That's
was
why I don't know
passed in
about
like
it.
the 20s or 40s or something. So then another lurking question is even if they change the meaning or like they restore the meaning, however you want to phrase it, of the Constitution, does that change the meaning of the statute? Because the statute has
Oh,
identical
if it's
language,
got identical language.
right? So like
Yeah.
this is like a true originalist mindfuck because one argument would be the meaning of the statute is what the people meant at the
At the
time they
time,
passed
it's
it.
the same words, different meanings. I'll
Yeah,
buy that. I'll buy it. Yeah.
that's in like 1920s 1940s when it was clearly what they
Yep.
did mean the modern understanding, right? But then the counter argument would be what they meant to do was peg it to the 14th.
Oh, yeah.
Right, but yeah, like it wouldn't that
It's
be
like an
really funny?
incorporation doctrine argument, basically.
Yeah,
Yeah.
wouldn't it be really funny if the outcome was the court goes, yes, we think Trump is right. The 14th Amendment, no birthright citizenship in the way that you've described. But the law that was passed subsequently, the original meaning of that law was that you do get birthright citizenship. So constitutionally, this is legal, but it is contrary to an existing statute on point. Therefore, the executive order is
I would laugh.
illegal. Go pass a law.
Yeah.
That would be the funniest outcome.
That would be the funniest outcome. That would be the best outcome. Or just in terms of just rock comedy, I agree. But yeah, I am sort of, if they copied the language exactly, then I am on board with the idea that they really meant to peg the meaning to the 14th Amendment. And so the question would be if that what that was meant, if that was misunderstood by the people at that time who drafted that statute, would they have drafted it more along the lines of what they thought the 14th Amendment drafters meant?
Yeah,
Probably, but
that's
maybe not.
interesting.
But maybe not.
Oh,
So,
and before we segue,
oh, sure.
grassroots with the Big Ten. Thank you, buddy.
Hey,
Look at that. I'd be surprised by any broadly conservative court to work in lockstep. There are conservative values I own connected to property rights and self ownership. Wouldn't bend on if you pulled my teeth. Yeah, I think that I don't want to overread this because the truth is, whenever there's a strong majority and a strong minority in the court, the minority sticks together thick as thieves most of the time. It's just kind of like political survival reflex on some level. But I will say that we've seen an impressive diversity of opinion amongst the conservative justices. And if we're going to segue to the tariff case, this is a great
great
segue
example of that.
because holy shit, if I have to hear one more smug fucking lefty commentator tell me that the court is just like a bunch of Trump toadies
Rubber
and they're
stamp.
so it's a rubber stamp. The Trump is it's so fucking corrupt that we have to pack the court. That's like if you talk to like Pisco and Josiah, that's not even like their edgy ask anymore. They're like, no, court packing's a given.
They were kind of hiding it a little bit before. A lot of the kind of more left-wing commentators were hiding it before, but you're right. I mean, besides Josiah, who's always, to his credit, he's always been everything maximally Democrat power. Okay, look, I appreciate that. I know exactly where you stand. That's fair. But yeah, they are all open with it now. They're just pack the court.
It's unbelievable because of course, the fact that the court just dismantled Trump's signature economic policy on purely legal grounds has done nothing to change the mind of any of them. Any of them. It's evidence with no impact whatsoever. Like none of them were like, oh, I guess that maybe that Gorsuch and Barrett they seem like good eggs, or maybe originalism's not all bad. Nope, it's just like screw you, Trump. We got you. Like ha ha ha. But also we're still packing the court, which is I think it's been stunning to see how little they cared about that.
Yeah, no, I think you're entirely right. Packing the court to me, and I've had debates on this before. I'm pretty sure we are in full lockstep on this. I mean, packing the court truly is a nuclear option for which in today's environment, right? Because when you look, I'm pretty sure the last time we packed the court was following the Civil War. I'm pretty sure it was in 1868, if I'm not mistaken. And the South was neutered essentially. The political power was entirely within Northern Republicans, and there wasn't the kind of political partisanship that you see today because the South was defeated. Right? They were occupied, and they had to kind of get with the program if they wanted to be readmitted back into the Union as states. But now, in today's political environment, the first party that packs the court, what's going to happen.
It's going to be it's a nuclear bomb.
Yeah, because here's what's going to happen. I'll just tell you what I would do, right? Okay. Whatever party opposed to me, they win the election. They pack the court. They had 3 justices. Okay, you add 3. That's great. I win. I'm adding 12.
Yep.
And then they win, and they're adding 24.
Well,
and then I win it, and I'm making every single person who's part of my party a honorary Supreme Court justice member.
Oh, and of course,
stop me.
The justices are going to become increasingly toadies. Like the quality is going to go way down, and then of course the ultimate casualty is the rule of law itself.
Yeah,
because like in a system where every party packs the court and the law is whatever they say it is, then no one would give a shit what the law is, other than to the extent that it gets enforced against them. There'd be no moral reason to follow the law. It would literally just be a power grab.
There'd be no stability.
Oh, it would be an absolute nightmare. Absolute nightmare.
Yep.
So I mean, it's incredible to me how casual they are around this. And whenever I call them out on this, the thing that they always say, and this one pisses me off more because of my own principles, because I'm not enough of like a foaming partisan to just like take the partisan line here.
Because
they'll say, yeah, McConnell stole the seat. Yeah. That's court packing. And I'm like, no, it's a thing.
It's not good, but it's
It's
not
a
court packing.
bad thing, but it's
Yeah.
not court packing. And they're like, oh, that's a distinction without it. Like, and you're just making up terms. Like, no, it actually is meaningfully different. Like, do I think McConnell should have given Garland a vote? Yes.
Yeah.
Do I think Garland would have won that vote? No. Like,
Really?
I maybe not. Like, but either way, the ultimate question is like, do you have like the difference between expanding the court and adding seats and playing parliamentary games with the advice and consent process is very different.
Yeah.
I'm not saying one's good and one's bad. Like, I think they're both bad, but like the difference between like shot with a BB gun and shot with a nuke is worth being aware of. I mean, do you think he would have won the vote? That's interesting. I assumed that they had a maybe they weren't lockstep enough to prevent it. I'm not sure.
Well, so this is obviously purely speculation because it never happened.
Mhm.
I think that it would have been tough just because, I mean, at the time, now you could argue some things changed after he was actually given some power in the Biden administration. You can argue that maybe some true colors started to come through, but at the time he was seen as extraordinarily moderate. Um, I don't think that he had a ton of baggage. I could be mistaken there, but from what I
Mhm.
recall, he didn't really have a ton of baggage. Not a lot of that people could really throw against him. And really, the principal argument that was used to not vote on him was that, hey, this is an election year, like we're running right up against it. Um, the people are going to decide. I'm pretty sure that was McConnell's actual words, if I remember
Mhm.
correctly. Like, we're going to let the voters decide who the Supreme Court justice pick is. Um, and I just don't know how well that would fly in an actual vote on the merits of putting uh, a Supreme Court justice on the bench.
Yeah.
So you're maybe the Republican Party would have been lockstep enough.
Maybe they would have held the line. I mean,
It's
they were
possible, but it would have been
they were
harder.
pretty obstructionist back then. Like that
Yeah,
was
no, for sure. And look, obviously they were, obviously the party under McConnell was willing to do that, which I've never defended that, right? I had a debate on this very subject, and I was clear. Yeah, that's not a good thing. And but you're right, there is a massive difference because one is okay, if you want to do the same thing, if that's critical to you, like, again, not good, but if you want to do the same thing, then sure, picking like to like would be more understandable, right? So, I don't know, Thomas dies or resigns in like the last year of modern day Trump's second term.
Mhm.
And for whatever reason, Democrats control, both houses. They're probably going to get the House this coming midterms, but let's say they control both houses. And the Senate Majority Leader, prevents, no, we're not voting on. We're going to wait. We're going to wait until the next election. That would be like for like. That would be comparable. Again, wouldn't like it for the same reason I didn't like it when McConnell did it, but that would be like for like. Packing the court, I think it's the reason I call it a nuclear option is because it very much like a nuclear reaction. It's exponential,
Mhm.
right? Like, it's one atom blowing apart multiple. In that the response will be more. It has to be more because you have to respond to something like that, right? You're going to add three. You're going to add
Yeah.
three justices to the Supreme Court. The Republicans have to respond when they get in power. At least they believe they do, and they will. And they're going to cite what you did as precedent, and they're going to do it, and they're going to do it twice as hard. And then the Democrats are going to come in power, and they're going to do it twice as hard. And nuclear
Well,
reaction.
it's also it's a unique problem in many ways because, like, let's say the Republicans broke the filibuster. The Democrats would obviously, the next time they take power, benefit from a broken filibuster, right? And so it politically
Yeah.
balances out over time in that way. And there might be some retaliation, but it tends to be proportional. Like, you broke the filibuster as to X, we'll break it as to Y, right? This is both disproportional, but also different in kind. Because what it does is it convinces the public that the Supreme Court justices are elected politicians.
Yeah.
And if you do a couple cycles of court packing, that's not even convincing the public. That's just the public understanding something that is true. And that's really dangerous. Like, I don't know how you recover from that. If we get to a place where like the judges are not viewed as lawyers. And this is ultimately, I know we've talked about this before, but just to give you people in chat, like the greatest hits, this is the ultimate argument for originalism, is that the only way to preserve the rule of law long term is for judges to act as lawyers and interpreters of law first, foremost, tertiary. That's what they do. They're there to interpret law. If they are there to be political wish giving genies,
Yep.
then of course
Yep.
their nomination process should be political. Because why wouldn't it be? And it would be crazy not to treat every nomination like it was a political, nuclear bomb, like it was the end of days. It would be crazy not to pack the court if you had the wrong setup. If you believe that all they're doing is politics. And I think, by the way, I don't know about the whole left, but speaking to people like Josiah and Pisco and whatnot, I think they do believe that. Like they firmly believe that the court's just a political football, and that's why they treat it the way they do.
But then how do they make sense of the tariff scale? Like, again, you made a good point. This was the central economic proposal of the Trump administration. This is what they ran on, right? This We are going to put in tariffs. We're going to put in so many tariffs, it's going to replace income tax. We're going to get rid of all your income taxes. We're
Yeah.
just going to have tariffs. Okay.
Good
A lot of
luck.
problems with a lot of that. Okay. I said so at the time, saying so now. But that's what they ran on. And they were very clear about that. And the Supreme Court just cucked that whole thing. They're just, no, actually, the authority that you were using to do this, perpetually is now gone. Now, Trump is saying, well, I got these other authorities, but they're temporary. The ones he's citing
Yeah.
now to bring back, they're temporary. They're going to go to Congress. I think, what is it, 120 days, or there's
Yeah,
certain.
it depends. There's a few. I think one's 120 or 150, something like that.
Yeah,
Another one requires that there's like some sort of Commerce Department process to determine
yeah,
that like a sector is a national security issue, and that's like the steel tariffs he did. That type, which can last longer, but it requires this other process. So, and that's not global. Like that's a sector thing, not a global thing. So yeah, I mean, they took a sledgehammer to it. And look, they did it with the National Guard earlier too.
they
I
did.
you had Robertson Barrett
Yep.
who took a sledgehammer there to what he was doing. So you've seen justices very willing to go the other way. And I think Gorsuch is a great example because Gorsuch was a dissenter in the National Guard case and joined the opinion on the tariff case. So clearly his view of the law is coming well before his politics, right?
Yeah.
Like and then the one that really pissed me off is when people were like, Amy Comey Barrett's a traitor. I'm like, what, Roe v. Wade getting overturned wasn't conservative enough for you? Like, shut the fuck up. Like you guys have the people who are like throwing shade at the conservative justices, I'm like, you guys have no idea how good you have it. This is the best court
It's
of my
great.
lifetime.
It is. It is.
Maybe historically great
Yeah.
court. Like this is a great court.
It's one of the best.
Yeah. So like, if this isn't good enough for you, what you want is toadyism, which is the thing I'm criticizing the left for. So like, we're not making the same argument anymore, buddy. Like this is a problem now.
Those people do exist on the right. They do. There are people, I've seen it, where whenever any conservative justice, like conservative justice, I'm
Mhm.
putting that in quotes, whenever a conservative justice rules against Trump, um, they are like, well, no, you can't do that. You owe loyalty, right? He put you there. You
Nope.
owe him. You owe him your vote. When it's not, again, it should not be political. It should be, sure, there should be an element of, it should be ideological in the sense of, like, a legal philosophy, but it should never be, oh, this is the party that I like, therefore we're going to have the decision reflect whatever's beneficial to that party. Um, and unfortunately, I think some people want that on the right, but I really do think that there's a lot of people on the left that want that. I think that living constitution theory sort of embodies that as a legal philosophy. And I do think in many ways it's kind of open partisanship disguised as a legal philosophy. But I think they're even dropping that now. And the court packing push and the complete, just complete rejection of the legitimacy of the current court is, despite the recent tariffs case, despite the National Guard case that you brought up, um, yeah. At what point, Ryan, do you think it's just TDS?
I mean, it's getting pretty wild like I'm trying to see, maybe I might pull it up if I can't remember it accurately enough, but I reviewed a case that came out of the Ninth Circuit where it was reviewing TPS, temporary protective status, so refugee designations for Nepal, Honduras, I think Haiti, well, the three countries. And I'm reading this case, and I've never and this is a federal judge, and I've never. You want to talk about like TDS or postmodernism or like however you diagnose it. She, first of all, the law says verbatim, there shall be no judicial review. The secretary's designation of termination of TPS status, no judicial review. Not a barrier at all. She says, we're not reviewing the decision, we're reviewing the process that led to the decision. Okay, right? Then it says no injunctive relief. And she's like, no, no, no. Though I am granting injunctive relief, I'm allowed to do that. There's like 4 separate provisions that say she has no jurisdiction. Blows past all of them, right? Then you get to the end, and in her conclusion, she's giving her explanation of what she just did, where she got immediately overruled by the Ninth Circuit because her ruling was preposterous. But here's what she said. She said, those of us, meaning herself, entrusted with making a more just society need to
Yes,
translate lived
of
experience
course.
into the protection of law. She views it as her job as a federal judge to translate lived experience
Yes.
into law.
Well,
And
because
then at the top, just to give you the last cherry on this, she said, law shouldn't be determined based off the whims of the powerful. Meaning here, the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security and the presidents, their say shouldn't override the lived experience of the people. Like,
because that would be colonialism, right?
I'm,
And I think we need to decolonize our minds, and we have to accept the lived experience and reject the
yeah,
authority of the oppressors of the DHS and Donald Trump, who is racist, xenophobic,
clearly.
bigoted, and every other phrase you can think of, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I mean,
Well,
of course, Ryan. How can you not think
and
this?
to your point, you could only interpret that, I think, 2 ways. One is she honestly believes what I view as essentially communist agit propaganda, and she has interpreted that as her personal philosophy.
Yes.
That's option 1. Option 2 is that she just believes Trump is such a unique evil that she is justified in making legal decisions on the basis of politics in this instance in order to combat the deleterious effects of this particular person.
Some kind of utilitarian analysis kind of going
Yeah,
on.
because like I was blown away by it because I was like, I I I was hopeful that very few judges in their private thoughts thought these things, but I did not expect them to admit it. Like to just write it down proudly. Like, you know what I mean? Like could you imagine if somebody was like some like conservative judge was like, no, because I endorse racism. You're supposed to keep your like secret intrusive thoughts to yourself and not like
Yeah,
not broadcast them on the page. It's like,
it's supposed to be implicit, man. You gotta keep it hidden a little bit, right? What are you doing?
oh,
Yeah.
look, I'm now behind on Grassroots, who's being an omega whale today. So let me catch up.
Hey.
Grassroots with another 10. This sounds based. I'm off low quality and I want to be on the Supreme Court. Where's the problem here? Okay, Grassroots. You know what? If we pack the court and I'm in power and we're in like the doom spiral of democracy, I'll hit you up. You can be the 978th justice on the U.S. Supreme Court.
Why not?
As we sink into the bottom of the Titanic. And then Grassroots with another 10. That's the sentiment that makes me desperately hate all populism. Yeah, I've to a certain extent made my peace with populism. Not that I like it, I don't. But just that I guess, and this is like going deep off law into culture. I didn't realize how deep, and I'm using the word communist very broadly here. I'm not talking about the economic system. I'm talking about a belief in perpetual revolution here. But that this sort of cultural Marxist view, I didn't realize how deep that went. and how many institutions it has touched. And
Just
I'm
go look
not
at
a
any sociology department. I mean,
oh yeah, yeah. I'm not a fan of populism, but on the flip side, this is the first time in my life where the conservative movement hasn't just stopped it temporarily, but there's been active rollback. Like there's been active reclamation of space, which is that's never happened before. In my life, it's always been progressivism pushes, conservatives stop it for 4 years, but it stays exactly where it was and then continues. It's only temporary interruptions. But we've actually seen like rollbacks of DEI culture,
we
which
have,
is incredible. I didn't think that was going to happen.
which is great. I wanted to say, I'll put this forward. Anybody who is both a subscriber of mine and also Ryan's will be on the short list for the expanded Supreme Court. So I will be I will, in fact, I'll just pull up those lists as soon as I gain power, and just write down the list. Anyway, all of them will be all of you, all of you. So
Yeah. I
that's what I'll do.
mean, in the world where we're packing the court to that extent, I think that's as good a system as any.
Yeah, why not?
And think about the investment. You paid $10, in 2026 and 2038, you're on the Supreme Court in a dying nation. Imagine the gains. The ROI is so high.
Yeah, you can you could rule on whatever you wanted, right? Hey, look, the First Amendment means you must wear red shirts on Tuesdays. Hey,
Who
you're the Supreme Court.
who's to say it doesn't?
Who's I
Who's to say?
look?
I
Our interpretation has evolved, Ryan. The needs of the country now dictate that. Uh, you know.
it's so funny you said that. A few days ago, I actually read Obergefell with
Oh,
my stream because Obergefel's like my originalist origin story.
yep. Peace and love,
Because
man.
because the decision came out, and I have enough libertarian leanings where it was like when it came out, I was kind of like, oh yeah, great, yay,
I would,
and
yeah.
then I read it and was like, oh no, like he just Kennedy just keeps writing like, well, when we, the court, determine in our reasoned judgment that there's a liberty interest at stake, then of course it is so. And it's like, then Scalia steps in with one of the great dissents of all time and says, like, the hubris involved in just casually saying, in my reasoned judgment, every citizen, every government, every state, every court for 135 years was doing something unconstitutional. Because in my reasoned judgment,
Our
I have.
founders, when they were putting the country together, they were thinking, yeah, yeah. The 14th Amendment, right? When they were drafting that, they were thinking, yes, of course, this is what that protects. Yes, of course, this is
Yeah.
the most reasonable way. Yeah, and you know, we, I am a firm proponent. I really want that case to be overturned, especially because it won't affect anything. My understanding is because there already has been separate legislation that has been passed that protects gay marriage, and so that case could just be axed tomorrow, and it wouldn't have any impact, like practically
I,
speaking.
it would be very low. I actually think the cultural window has moved on that. Like you might get one or two states that held out. There might be some federal, but it would have very little impact. I
Yeah,
think practically.
well, it's
I'm
still a
not sure.
federal statute, right? I mean, I'm pretty sure there's a federal statute that applies to the whole country.
I don't know. That's an interesting question. Does anybody in chat know? Like, is there a federal statute that does the same thing? Like, I'm not positive.
Okay.
Furthermore, though, I don't know why the federal government has a say on marriage law at all. Would be like another question that I might. That's like my larger bugbear, if I want to be honest with you. Like I just don't like the idea of federalism, where something like marriage isn't sufficiently local not to be a federal power. It's like, well, okay, then we're saying nothing's not federal at that point
Sure.
because, like, what
Well, haven't you read
it.
Wicked versus Filburn? Everything is federal, Ryan.
Haven't you read the worst case in the history of the US? Yeah.
Look, if selling grain is federal, then I'm pretty sure it
Yeah,
stands to
selling grain
reason
to your
that
neighbor.
marriage might as well.
Oh boy. Wow. Now, well, hold on. People are just fucking oiling the stream right now. So I'm
Oh,
gonna
hell yeah.
I'm gonna take that money and make sure I'm paying attention to them carefully. Grassroots hates populism. We covered that. Have you been following the state assault rifle and magazine bans working their way through the federal courts? If so, do you know why SCOTUS hasn't taken a case yet? I have not been.
I have not been either.
I know who has been, though, is potentially Criminal Sean. And he's a friend of the stream. If you haven't checked him out, please do. He's been covering this. But as to general principles, SCOTUS, getting a case to SCOTUS is tricky. There needs to really be a circuit split or something that the court thinks they're ready to take on. So just because they don't take the case now doesn't mean that it's not destined for the court eventually. It just sometimes takes some time. Grassroots with the $2, this is right-wing communism. Yeah, right-wing communism is when you grassroots are the next Supreme Court justice, clearly. And Desert Druid for $2 and another $2. Can I be a congressman and a justice? Well, since you donated 2 and another 2, yes. 1 for the congressman, 1 for the justice. In the sinking ship that is America in 2025, 2020, whatever, 2055, Desert Druid can be a congressman and a justice. Why not? Why not? And by the way, if you guys don't follow Lactoid, why not? You're here. You follow me. If you like my content, the odds you'll dislike Lactoids is basically 0. So
yeah, I plugged myself a little bit in your chat. I apologize.
Oh, please. And yeah, I think mods are putting in the link if they haven't already. Okay, well, we got one. Jesus, this is a profitable stream. Lactoid, I got to have you on more often. This is going great. This is going great. Lessons 3616. Don't really care if you're conservative or lib. The nation needs people with your way of viewing the country and its laws on the SCOTUS bench. Won't expect to see you in it, but would love to see you in it. My brother, I would love to get into the game. That's kind of what this channel was about. Is I think that there's a and thank you for the 20, by the way. I think it, and I swear to God, we're going to do the terrorist case, but I think there's a hesitance sometimes for lawyers to speak publicly because you can get backlash, it can get ugly, you can get internet drama. But then if lawyers don't speak publicly, who's going to defend like the originalist takes in the court? Who's going to be out there saying that, no, this is the right way to do things? Who's going to defend the First Amendment? Like, I feel like, it kind of has to be us. I don't know who else it would be.
I also want to make it absolutely clear, and I think this is something that was touched on by the super chat that I think a lot of people miss, is that there absolutely is room for left-leaning originalists like that. There is room for that, right? If you believe in consistent rule of law, you can be an originalist and also prefer policy that happens to lean potentially very far left. And even though I might disagree with some aspects of your policy prescriptions, I think on the real fundamentals of what it means, to maintain America, which I think originalism really does, I think you're on the right side of. So, yeah, I think that's definitely an option. Nobody's asking everybody to turn away all their political beliefs. That's totally. I have some left-leaning political beliefs, very much like Ryan. Like, I got no problem with gay people getting married. I'm okay with it, right? Don't bother me none. But the process matters, and law matters. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a double whammy: $5 and an answer to the question we didn't have. The Respect for Marriage Act only says states need to recognize other states' gay and interracial marriages under the full faith and credit clause. Interesting.
Could you get, because I know in Israel how they get around, like Israel doesn't have gay marriage, but they will do this. They'll recognize other places' marriage. And so in Israel, if gay people want to get married, they'd like do an online ceremony in some other country, and then Israel.
Yeah. So assuming this is correct, and I have no reason to think it's not, and thank you, Sula. Then if Obergefell was overturned, then some states could ban gay marriage, but they would be required to honor it if you went to Massachusetts and came back. Kind of like which was kind of that was what they were fighting about in Obergefell, is whether or not states had to recognize that. So it would kind of return to that world, though now there is this federal thumb on the scale.
Yeah, but would you even need to travel? Like, my thought would be, couldn't you just basically have the like, let's say you were in a state that
Hmm.
got rid of it. Let's imagine, I'm guessing Mississippi. I don't know. I'm guessing. I'm probably right. Let's say you're in Mississippi and you want to get married, you know, two men, and you have the whole ceremony in Mississippi. You do all that, and then afterwards, you just go online to the Massachusetts Department of State website, and you fill out some forms, and then they issue you the certificate. Could that work? Do you have to be a resident of the state of which you marry in? I don't think so.
You don't have to be a resident, but like, because you can go get married in Vegas, right? And then you have a
Well, yeah,
Vegas, yeah.
you're right. So yeah, so you could just do this.
But the question is, do you have to be physically present?
I,
That I think you do have to be physically present.
well, I think Massachusetts probably passed a law that would allow you to not have to be physically present.
Oh, and then that would be the new case that we all fight
Yeah,
about. That'd be a good one.
yeah.
I mean, the other thing, and just because and then I swear we will do tariffs, but the other thing about Obergefell that always drives me crazy is, okay, if gay marriage, because of the court's reasoned judgment, is clearly in the Constitution, though no one at the time meant it that way, the words aren't there, but it clearly is, right? Why is polygamy not protected? Like, this is my problem with this like reason judgment approach. Is it's like
Yeah.
the limiting principles don't exist. It's all just what the justice thinks that day, right? Like, it could be the case that as we start having more thruples and whatever
It could be
in
next.
that, yeah, the next time it comes before the court, they say, well, in our reasoned judgment now polygamy is included. Like, why not? Like, why wouldn't marriage be all of these things? I actually, based on Kennedy's logic, have no. I If I adopted Kennedy's position, I would have no counterpoint to that. I would say, yeah, probably.
I remember bringing up that point in law school, and it didn't go well with the other students. But
Oh, you were that guy.
what do you think?
So, most law schools are overwhelmingly left leaning, at least at the student level, and often at the professorship as well, unless you're at like U Chicago or some very specific places. One of my buddies got hissed at in class, like with some frequency. Um, it's yeah, it is what it is. It is what
Yeah,
it is.
yeah.
All right, so tariffs.
Tariffs.
Where did you land on that?
Okay, so and I'm gonna let you do a lot of the talking here because I've read some of it. I have not read the whole thing.
Yeah.
So
Well, Kavanaugh's dissent is 63 pages. I didn't read the whole thing there either.
yeah.
It's like,
So there's part of me that can empathize actually with the majority because to me the sense of it is somewhat similar to the sense of when the case that struck down student loan forgiveness, Biden student loan forgiveness, which is that um, like essentially, okay, the principle of it all is we understand you're arguing that you can do this, and hyper technically maybe, but we don't think that's really what Congress meant
mhm.
to give you. And this is when it comes to student loan forgiveness. Yeah, you probably have the authority to delay, to defer. You probably have the authority to do a little bit of stuff, but widespread blanket forgiveness, no, it's too far. That's not what was intended. And when it comes to tariffs, like, okay, emergency tariffs, steel tariffs, okay, um, certain chemicals necessary for the development of rocketry, I can buy, right? There's things I can buy. Um, a uniform tariff across every country on the planet and all goods based on reciprocal tariff rates that have no basis in national security other than defining a trade deficit, which is normally just an accounting
Mhm.
uh, methodology, as a national security threat. Does that go a little bit further than perhaps what Congress meant? I think there's a strong argument, actually. I think there's a really
Yeah.
strong argument there. So I don't think it comes out of left field. I think there's obviously a reason why the majority was able to get a few of the kind of more originalist leaning justices on board.
Mhm.
Um, I think really the key part of the question really was what's a val like is this really validly an emergency? I know you got to be really careful answering that, but is this really a valid emergency in terms of what kind of authority did Congress really intend
Mhm.
to provide? And yeah, it's a tough question, but I think the majority, I think I probably lean that way a little bit, despite the fact that
Yeah.
Alito's a good justice and one of my probably my favorite, but
So this was the one that I thought Trump was certain to lose.
mhm.
And the reason I thought he was certain to lose ended up being the reason he did lose, which is yay me. But it's that Gorsuch is really trying to pin his legacy to the major questions doctrine, which I actually think is a great idea. I think it's a really good idea. I loved it in the student loan case. We're saying like when we said that you could modify or waive provisions, did we mean that you could just forgive $450 billion of debt with the stroke of a pen? No. Like with OSHA, when Congress said that you could regulate health and safety in the workplace, did they mean you could mandate vaccines for 86 million people? No. Like when when there's another one, the example that Gorsuch gave was like when we said that you could determine the most effective means of energy generation, did that mean that you could like destroy the coal industry? No. Like, and there are these capacious grants of power in by Congress. And I actually do. I liked non-delegation doctrine when it was still a thing. I like major questions. I like the idea that if Congress is going to give a truly extraordinary power, they should at least say so.
Yeah,
Right. And I don't know if this is convincing for everyone, but Gorsuch made this point that I really liked, which he was saying, here's the danger. Congress passes a law and it passes because nobody thinks it means this. Like it's just not like nobody thought that this would be a vaccine mandate law or a student right. And then the president interprets it broadly. And then people say, well, that's what the law says. If Congress wants to fix it, they can fix it. Well, now they've got to overcome a veto. Right. So, like, if we're in the business of giving these extraordinary powers to the president that, as a practical matter, Congress never can take back,
yeah.
how do we ever police the boundaries between Article 1 and Article 2? It doesn't seem possible. So just from like a separation of powers perspective, I like the major questions doctrine. So
I agree.
I and I try to be consistent. Like I liked it when it shut down a bunch of Biden stuff. So I'm not going to change my mind about liking it. I'm now I know that Alito and Kavanaugh have kind of some. I think they argue that there should be a foreign policy exception to the major questions doctrine, which is not a terrible argument.
It's not a
It's
terrible argument. Foreign policy is one of those things that the
yeah,
president has a lot of discretion over.
has a lot of discretion, and Kavanaugh has a good. I think the best argument he has is that I forgot the name of it. The predecessor to IEPA was used by Nixon to institute a tariff, and the exact same language was incorporated in IEPA. So there's at least one historic example of the phrase regulate imports as being used for tariffs, which I think that's a pretty good historic point. It never made it to the Supreme Court, but it's at least a pretty good point. Um, Against which I kind of weigh the major questions doctrine as a whole, and I find that compelling. And this is why as much as I love her, I disagree with Barrett here, because Barrett wrote that you don't need the major questions doctrine to decide the case, and I think you do, because I think the foreign policy argument is actually a pretty good argument, and the Nixon argument's a pretty good argument. So you would need a thumb on the scale the
Yeah.
other direction to overcome those arguments, at least in my mind.
No,
But
I completely agree, because otherwise, I mean, we could just think of the absurdity, right? Like, um, what if instead of 10% tariffs, it was 200%,
yeah,
300%? What if all trade, like, does the president have the unilateral authority to end all trade across the entire, like, with all international trade tomorrow?
weirdly, I think he actually probably does.
You think so? Okay, go ahead and
Because,
explain.
well, I think regulate imports would include stopping all imports from a specific country. Like banning imports would be regulating imports.
Hold on. I'm talking from when you're saying a specific country. Do you think I'm talking about all countries? Do you
Oh,
think
for all countries?
yeah? Do you think tomorrow the president Trump could say, "I'm instituting a new plan of extreme autarky. It's time for America to be great and self-sufficient. There is no good allowed to cross the border into the United States."
Yeah. Um, I actually think that's a closer call than tariffs, weirdly, but like I think it's like weirdly, I think it's because the law, for the record, I hate IEPA. I think this is a dumb law. I
Okay.
think it's badly drafted. I don't think it makes a lot of sense. But like, yeah, I mean, regulate imports is about as capacious as language gets. Like what like 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 even getting to the point where it excludes taxes and tariffs would like took some doing. Like
I
what
just I think the major I think the major questions doctrine here is controlling. I do think that yes, there is room to regulate,
Mhm.
but there is very much similar. And I wanted to ask you some questions about this other topic in a second, but I'm going to use
Yeah.
it here because it's a good example. I think kind of similar to the president's Article 2 authority as commander in chief to initiate military force. He can, but there's limits,
Mhm.
right? There's where those limits are exactly is a little bit difficult to tell, but there are limits. And I think if tomorrow the president unilaterally shut down all imports into the country
Mhm.
because the trade deficit is just too much of a threat to national security, I don't know. It's a
Well,
tough one.
this is that's a great argument in favor of the major questions doctrine, which I'm going to steal because the part of my criticism, and I love Barrett, like I said, but of Barrett and of the liberal justices who refuse to join the major questions doctrine section of the opinion because they hate the major questions doctrine, is that they say that you can resolve this question without resorting to it. But like, and Gorsuch pointed this out because it's just so silly. It's like, come on, the same justices thought the vaccine mandate was fine. They thought the debt forgiveness was fine.
Right,
Right. They thought shutting down the coal industry was fine. Now they think the tariffs is bad. Okay, why?
right.
Like, and you can get into the weeds on each statute, but each of them has capacious language. Each of them has like a broad grant of authority. Um, I think we really do. It is better to give Congress a clear signal where you're
Yeah,
like, look, if you want to give the president extraordinary powers, the major question doctrine is lurking. You've
yeah,
got to say something clear,
yeah,
right? I think that's better, and I would like I support Justice Gorsuch's project of putting each branch of government back in their constitutional box.
yeah.
Like I think we've got a lot of chimeras out there right now, and it's like, you know what? Everyone go home. Do your jobs. So I think that your hypo is I think your hypo has pushed me strongly into the major questions camp because on a pure statutory interpretation level, I don't know that that wouldn't be right. But if you add a major questions gloss, then it's clearly wrong.
Right. And I think a major, like the major questions doctrine does, and I think it's fully, not only fully compatible, but I think really does defend originalism because again, it's getting back to the intent of,
Mhm.
um, we want to see that, if a branch is going to delegate that kind of power, or, yeah, that needs to be spelled out. Like you need to make this clear. Otherwise, yeah, the president can just take, you could twist statute to mean anything you wanted if you're creative enough. I mean, we're lawyers.
Yeah. I
This,
mean, remember, we just saw a judge say that the phrase no judicial review means judicial review.
yeah.
So, like,
So
yeah,
yeah.
you
So
can.
and the same thing with Wickard. This is my big criticism of Wickard versus Filburn, where
Mhm.
when you read it, it's like, well, yeah, I guess technically any price difference in one state does affect commerce by some immeasurable degree because the butterfly effect around the world, I suppose. But did they mean that? Do you think if
Mhm.
they really meant that, wouldn't they have spelled that out? Wouldn't they have made it absolutely clear that they mean interstate commerce to mean literally anything and everywhere? But
Yeah.
they didn't, because of
In
course
fact,
not.
Because it's insane,
Yeah,
and it basically means that we no longer have a limited federal government,
exactly.
like in one fell swoop of the pen. Yeah, no, I mean, I think these limitations are important, and I think that they're useful. Like, because if you know what they are, then people can adjust, and I think that's actually a better place to be. But I mean, regardless, I again, people have this view that Trump is ignoring the Supreme Court every day or something like that. But like, the National Guard court case came out, and no more National Guard. The tariff case came out, and yes, he is instituting new tariffs under different laws. But just for those of you who aren't normies, who aren't necessarily reading all this, the case was not about his ability to tariff in general. It was about his ability to tariff under one specific law.
Right.
And the answer was no. But that doesn't mean that the answer is no as to all these other statutes. That's not, it's not a constitutional question in that way. So, I think that he's complained about it, but I think it's okay for the president to complain when he loses a case.
Yeah.
That's not a problem, right?
No, yeah, he complained. He did say some things that I definitely don't agree with, but
The day of, yeah, he said some shitty stuff
yeah,
the day of.
he said some shitty stuff, but you know, yeah, not the best. So I'm not gonna defend everything that was said. I'm also not gonna, you know, but again, at the same time, looking at the court itself, you can't. I think the real takeaway here is you can't call it a rubber stamp, right?
No.
And here's the thing that frustrates me as well when people accuse him of ignoring the Supreme Court, or that the Supreme Court's rubber stamp kind of does whatever he wants. You pointed out, right? Whenever somebody gives you an example of this, it's just a misunderstanding, right? So, oh, he ignored them and decided to do tariffs anyway, leaving out the fact that he's actually drawing that authority from an entirely different statutory authority that is more limited. It's got to go to Congress within a certain number of days. There's more restrictions on it. It's not the thing that was struck down by the Supreme Court. Okay, you kind of left that part out. So he's not really ignoring the Supreme Court. Okay, fine. Abrego Garcia, right? He's ignoring the
Mhm.
Supreme Court. Is he though? Because they pulled out, or they didn't directly, but based on based on the Supreme Court, the appeals court did pull out the word effectuate. They specifically pulled out the word effectuate. Why? Because facilitate and effectuate mean very different things. And it would be a little bit of I think, interference into the president's foreign policy powers and exclusive powers to dictate that a president negotiates a certain way with a foreign head of state,
Oh
right?
yeah.
That's tough, right? To get something back. That now you're going to be really careful about what you're doing, because we're right in the president's powers now at this point. You're going to start ordering him how he deals with other heads of state. That's what we're going to
Yeah.
do. I mean, you better be careful. And so,
I
facilitate, yeah,
I
but
think he would correctly ignore an order like that. Like you, that's an.
yeah,
I
but
don't
now
think the court
potentially, but
doesn't
now
have
we
that
got a
authority.
crisis. Sure, but
Yeah.
now we
Now
got
we
a
have a crisis.
crisis. Yeah.
For sure.
So yeah, so he did ignore them though, because they pulled out effectuate, and that's a critical difference that I feel like people are ignoring. Another question, a question I had for you, and this was actually a big debate I had with Pisco a while ago. Do you think that Trump was within his Article 2 authority when he ordered the uh, kidnapping, let's call it what it is, of Maduro? The arrest, I suppose, maybe is a better term. The
I know.
arrest of Maduro. I'm a big proponent that he did have the authority. Pisco believes that he does not have the authority to do that. I'm curious on what your thoughts are.
I think that well, it depends what you mean. I'm going to do the Jordan Peterson. It depends what you mean by authority, and the reason I'm doing the meme, but the reason why is I think the president's ability to use military force short of a formal declaration of war is the grayest of gray areas in constitutional law. There is literally no case law. There's nothing there's just any case law would invite a constitutional crisis. Let's put it that way. So it's always a political question. We always punt. It really does seem like the sort of thing that gets hashed out more between Congress and the president than anything else. And So if the answer is, do I think there's like a clear affirmative grant of authority that I can point to and I can say is rock solid? No, I don't have that. Do I think, on the flip side, do I think that there's reason to doubt that he had that authority? Not particularly. And in the gray area, the president has the purview to act. I mean, like, the Korean War was not authorized. We lost 50,000 Americans, right? There was no declaration of war. It was a police action.
Right.
Like, so, if the president can lose 50,000 US troops in Korea without a declaration of war, can he execute a surgical strike against a head of state? Yeah, probably.
Yeah. So
Like,
no, yeah, and I would like to maybe take a little bit of time here, very briefly, and just explain why I think he does.
go for
I agree with everything you just said. There's nothing very explicit.
it.
It is a gray area. But I think that there's enough historical examples that the president has not been challenged on that I think really is, in my opinion, dispositive here. You brought the Korean War. A recent example is Obama
Mm-hmm.
in Libya. So
Yeah.
we launched airstrikes in Libya. And that was without congressional authority. Um, Obama, I don't believe he even told Congress before he did it. Right, launched the airstrikes. We're going to
Mm-hmm.
enforce a no-fly zone, and the bombs started coming down. Um, that one was actually, there was parts of it that were a little bit more egregious, in that Congress had a bill to authorize Obama to continue action there beyond 60 days, and that was voted down. Congress voted against continued military presence in Libya beyond 60 days,
Mm-hmm.
and Obama ignored that and kept going after 60 days. And 60 days here being a restriction of the War Powers Act. Um, that's a little bit scary, but it was arguable. Even that was arguable about whether or not Obama had
Mm-hmm.
that authority. But I think it's pretty clear within the first 60 days he definitely did. You brought up the Korean War. That's a good example. But going back to the founding, there's an example actually of one of our founding fathers doing this. Uh, have you heard about the Barbary Wars?
A little bit, but expand on it. I've heard a little bit.
Yeah. So the Barbary states were these nominally independent countries that were part of the Ottoman Empire in northern Africa, and they were subordinate to the Ottoman Emperor, but they had a lot of autonomy just in the kingdoms that they ruled in. There was pashas there. They're called pashas, right? And so you had like the Pasha of Tripoli, the Pasha of Tunis, and these different like
Mm-hmm.
little components. And they were notorious pirates, right? Some of the most piracy and slavery was actually from the raids from these Barbary states on commerce going through the Mediterranean, and they would fuck like a whole bunch of people up, and including American commerce. And it was common. The common understanding was that you can bribe them to stop raiding your shit. And so, the United States was kind of in negotiations, and thought they had paid them to stop raiding their shit. But there was always this sort of uneasiness because, I mean, you're dealing with pirates, right? You're dealing with people, or country level pirates. So, I mean, you're dealing with state actors, arguably state actors that are, you know, very difficult to reason with and very difficult to hold to their word. And Thomas Jefferson, one of our founding fathers,
Good
without
old TJ.
good old TJ, without congressional authority, and this is critically important, without congressional authority, Congress wasn't even in session. Congress, they were all out, and he
Mhm.
didn't bring them back. He ordered a naval squadron to be sent into the waters surrounding the Barbary states, and um, to engage if necessary, which they did. And there was a battle between the U.S. Navy
Yeah.
squadron and ships that were under the pashas of, I forget exactly which state, like
Hmm.
Barbary state it was, but it was under the Ottoman Empire. So I mean, this was effectively a state actor that we had the U.S. military engaging with across the world
Yeah. Oh,
without congressional authority. Now, is that
and
is that a
kind
war? Not really, but it is a military action that I think is pretty comparable to grabbing Maduro.
and on some level, the answer there has to be, of course, right? Because could you imagine, like, imagine if U.S. citizens were, I
Exactly.
don't know, they were in like the British Virgin Islands, and there was like some kind of local uprising, and the U.S. citizens were being captured. right? Oh, do we
Wait
really
for a
think
declaration of war.
yeah, the president's like, all right, hold on, hold on. I got to convince the Democrats to vote for a declaration of war before I
Yeah,
save them. It'll take a few months,
right.
win some hearts and minds. We'll see how the midterms go, and then I'll get back to you about whether we're like on some level. Yeah, obviously the commander in chief must have some kind of military flexibility. It's all about these kind of like shades of gray and line drawing. And the reason that I feel like Pisco's take was so dog shit on that point is that it was there's just a degree of certainty involved in his position that I don't think is possible. And this is a case where the tie goes to the president. So he has to be certain. He has to be like, no, it's absolutely unconstitutional.
Right.
And it's like, look, my guy, like, again, for the normies, there's something called the War Powers Resolution, which is what Congress attempt after the Korean War. They had purported to limit the power of the president to do unilateral military action.
Sort of.
Sort of, right? And it requires notice and a bunch of other things, right? Every president has when they provide Congress with notice, they sign it with a little thing where they're like, basically, we are doing this because we want to, not because we think you have the authority to tell us to.
Yeah.
Like every time. No president has admitted that that was constitutional. None. And there's never been a Supreme Court case on it. And this is what I mean. Like you're going to have endless historic examples of executive power, now dating back to Thomas Jefferson, all the way through America in different scenarios to different degrees. The idea that suddenly this one is a bridge too far and is clearly unconstitutional is kind of insane, unless he's saying that all the other ones were unconstitutional too. And that just puts you back in the Obergefell position where you're like, God, you got to be the hubris of you saying that every president.
Thomas Jefferson
Yeah.
had less of an idea of what the Constitution was intended to provide than us.
Than Pisco.
I think that's a really hard sell. I just wanted, it was pointed out in your chat, it was a quick historical fact that I want to acknowledge, which is that Jefferson did eventually get approval through Congress afterward, like months afterwards. That is true. But the question is, at the time of action, did he have congressional authority? Because that's really what we're talking about when it comes to presidents doing things. And he did not, right? And he didn't have it for a long time. He didn't have it until after the battle was over, that first battle I was talking about. And so, I do think that there is a very strong originalist argument that, of course, the commander in chief has room, short of declaring war. Where that is, we don't exactly know. But short of declaring war, there is room for military action. And another thing, really quick, the War Powers Resolution. This is the point I was trying to make during the debate, which is that implicitly acknowledges that the president has authority to engage in some kind of offensive or defensive military action short of war, because it puts limits on how they can do it, right? You can do this for 60 days, but then you have to stop unless we give you permission. Okay, so you're saying I can do it for 60 days, right? You're saying that you're acknowledging that there are situations that I can, like sending in the Navy after the pirates, like bombing Libya, like taking Maduro, right? I mean, he was wanted.
Yeah, and look, I guess the counter argument there would be like, no, they were putting limits, not granting authority, but the default state was that they had the authority
under Article 2, right?
And then on the constitutional level, the question is it even their power to rescind? Because if it's a commander in chief power, Congress actually can't take it back. And now, are there outer limits on it? I would think so. I don't know how this would ever be adjudicated because I can't, this is just the court taking a case like this would just invite a constitutional crisis. So I just don't think they will. But let's say, it's tough because of the Korean War example. But in theory, if you had prolonged conflict of a certain duration of intensity, you might think that would not be the sort of thing you could do without a declaration of war, for example. But the Korean War is a tough example, man. I'm not going to lie. That's a tough example because that was a prolonged conflict. We lost a lot of people.
Sure.
It's, I don't know. I honestly just think this is a very murky area. And then the hilarious other end of that was people being like, it's a clear violation of international law for which people are going to be prosecuted. I'm like, get the fuck out of here. You guys
Yeah.
clearly have no understanding what America's relationship to international law is. If you think that's a thing, like that's not a thing.
Yeah.
But P School is on like a we're going to charge them with murder.
Well, I think that was in regards to the boats,
Yeah,
the bombing the boats. Yeah, because there was a question: is this war crime or is this murder? Um, I haven't looked into the boat bombings nearly as much
yeah,
as I've looked into some of the other things here. So I'm guessing the president has authority to, again, if they're able to engage in this kind of limited military action. Um, I, I'm a little bit, I'm not a big fan though, unless they're, and I understand maybe why they don't want to do this, but I would like to see some pretty good evidence that those boats are carrying drugs, perhaps, or other
yeah.
things before we start shooting them.
Yeah, I would agree with that. This is the, I think, for those who are critical of the drone strikes during the Obama administration, this is kind of the same point that was being
Yeah.
made, right? Where it's just like, this is a power that can be very easily misused once the cat's out of the bag, so as it were. But while I think that may be the case, and on a policy level, I'm sensitive to those arguments. This new impulse that we're going to solve all these problems through criminal prosecutions, like we're going to prosecute the soldiers who executed the orders, like that's nonsense. Like that you can't. That's not that. I think that the damage that would do to the American military command structure outweighs any benefits it might have as a starting point. Plus, my understanding is that soldiers, for them to disobey an order, it has to be like manifestly illegal. Like it has to be clear. And
Yeah.
like
This is
could
not
you
clear.
imagine? Could you imagine you're sitting there? They're like, "Here's the coordinate. Push the button. Shoot the drone." And you're like, "Hold on. I have a view of the American Constitution and
Let
the
me call my
delegation
lawyer.
of you know what I mean? Like we're two practicing attorneys who think about this shit a lot, and we don't know the answer. We're expecting that like a soldier sitting there with his finger on
An
the
18-year
button.
old who's just like now gotten like into in the military and they're making these decisions. Like no, there is a burden of it's just that's incredibly high if we're going to have this expectation of complete knowledge on soldiers, which is just we can't have it.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's what it comes down to ultimately to me. Like, if you're gonna, it's one thing to disagree with the policy, but I think that's ultimately a political question.
Yeah,
Like, I think
probably.
whether or not we engage in strikes of that sort is going to be decided at the ballot box. But I don't think you can prosecute military men for like obeying orders in this context because it's not clear to me these are illegal. It
Right.
would have to be clearly illegal. Like if somebody said like, all right, go in and rape the children. It's like I got it. Like like there are lines, but this isn't that.
Well, I think with Abu Ghraib, we did. I think there was some prosecutions regarding that because if I'm not mistaken, let
Hmm.
me look into that a little bit actually, just before I say that for sure. I'm pretty sure there was, um, because there was, yeah, 11 U.S. Army personnel were convicted of crimes related to torture. So yeah, okay, can't do torture of like
Yeah.
people who are detained. That one pretty clear, right? Don't torture people, and by the, it was pretty explicit. It wasn't like this sort of is it torture to like deny somebody a phone call for a certain. No, it was like
Hmm.
they were medieval kind of shit on these people. So clear enough, I'm sold. But your commanding officer tells you that a boat's coming in with like that's potentially has armed enemies on it, narco terrorists.
Hmm.
That one's not so clear, not nearly.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and the thing about this is ultimately, like the determination was made, right? The president said fentanyl is a weapon of mass destruction. Now, you might agree or disagree with that, right? It's poisoning all these people, et cetera, et cetera. And then here's how it's being brought into the country. I I don't know that there's a basis there for saying that that's manifestly wrong, right? Whereas in the torture example, it's like, okay, like you really thought that like, when you were putting you clipping the batteries to the guy's nipples, like that was you were thinking, huh, this is probably fine. Like, I think that there's a big difference in kind, and there's also like an information asymmetry. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know that there's an easy way to fix this one. Because let's say that you wanted to pass a law that would limit the president's power to use military strikes in this way. What would it even say?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, because the War Powers Resolution kind of tried to do that and failed.
Yeah, and there's no way it's doing that about something like this, like limited strikes on incoming vessels. How are you going to limit that?
Yeah, exactly. And anything you passed, I think the court punts on.
Yeah.
And then, so ultimately, I think this is just a purely political question. I think that like the president has the power if people want to vote for presidents who think they have the power, and don't if they don't. I think that's it. And maybe it just comes down to I think someone said this. Yeah. Thank you, James. Thank you for the 5. The president can wage war as long as 34 senators don't care enough to remove him from office. That's that might be the
Ultimately,
system.
yeah. Yep.
That might be the system. I'm not. It's tough. Then that's why I call it such a gray area, because you literally can't have a nation if the president doesn't have this power.
Right.
Like, imagine Germany's invading us. The U-boats are like, beaching themselves in Manhattan, and and now we're going to district court to decide, does the president get to mobilize the military, or
Universal
does he need?
injunction against
Yeah,
drones.
universal injunction. Does he need congressional authorization to send the troops to stop the U? Like, you have to have a president who can respond nimbly to evolving situations, or you just don't get to be a country anymore. Like,
Yeah.
you see this in Europe, by the way. Like, I think the death knell of Europe ultimately is going to be that they invented a continental bureaucracy without a vigorous executive, and they just seem paralyzed as a result. Like, they can't fucking do anything.
Right.
And you know, people like Putin, China, they just, these are more nimble actors, and it's difficult for a bureaucracy to respond to them.
Right. Right. But yeah, and you need to have, like with the president, you have to have some level of nimbleness, and that's but there's also got to be some limitations, like with tariffs, major questions doctrine, and yeah, there are limits as well with the military action with the president. I think that there's a point where this should be a declaration of war. I think the Korean War hit that, honestly. I think that
Yeah.
the best argument is yeah, that was a full scale deployment. That should have been a declaration. Um, Limited strikes, drone strikes, uh, you know, TAC teams going in. I don't think so. I think that's pretty clearly within the president's unilateral authority to order.
Yeah.
Um, it's a gray area where the line is. I just think that this is pretty clearly on one side of that line.
I think so. I tend to agree. Like, I think that it really bothered me, for example, when those 6 congressmen put out that video about, like, you must disobey unlawful orders,
Yeah.
right? Because, and I'm not saying that like that's sedition or not protected speech. I'm
Right.
not saying any of that stuff. Like, I think that's nonsense. I don't think you can prosecute them, but it's just a shitty thing to do.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like,
It's like burning the
like
flag. It's like, yeah, you have the right to do it, but come on,
exactly,
what the fuck?
right? Like, you don't, soldiers are in this like life and death scenario. You don't tell them that they like should be, second guessing orders in this like highly charged political way,
It's the implication.
because yeah,
Yeah.
it's going to get somebody killed. It's truly a dangerous thing to do. And I don't think that there's, and again, like, I have so many criticisms of Trump, but I don't think there's a Trump exception to the presidency where he gets less power than every other president did because, orange man bad, or they don't like him or something. It just doesn't, it can't work that way.
But he's really bad, though, Ryan. Have you considered?
He-
Have you
have you
considered Orange Man bad? I don't
how
know.
have you considered the depths of his
The
badness?
depths of some levels of badness may override. What was the quote that you said before? Um, these decisions can't be dictated by power or something like
Oh
that.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
It shouldn't be dictated by the whims of the
the
powerful.
whims of the powerful, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that I've never seen anything like that decision. It fucking blew my mind. It blew my mind. The since we're and I do need to read a few super chats, but
Of
before because we
course.
brought up that train wreck of a decision, the other thing she did in that decision, which just like I, it was just stunning. She gave the history, like in the background section of each TPS determination,
Yeah.
and she wrote it in that like very neutral way, where it like she wasn't trying to politicize it. But you look at each of them, and it's like temporary status was granted. It was extended for huge periods of time. Some of these 20 years, like these were 1998, right? They've temporary status this whole time. So generations of people. They Trump tried to terminate them. It got held up in court during Trump won. Biden reconsidered the termination, and now Trump tried to terminate it again. Every single time. Right. And she's reciting this like it's this like very neutral, unbiased thing. And you're like, wait a minute, you're saying that like the president's been trying to terminate this status for 2 terms and it got held up in court and and today you're still saying no, like we're you can never end a temporary program, like
There,
it unbelievable.
some of the details that are left out. There was one example of this pretty recently. It was a Korean, somebody who was like in not the Korean War, but was like served in, I forget the details, but essentially was in some sort of adjunct role with the U.S. military, um, and he self-deported because the administration threatened to
Mhm.
deport him. The reason being, and I forget which congressperson did this. I should really have all the details in line if I'm going to recite the story, but I'm just going to shoot from the hip anyway. Um, and she held up a picture of him, and it's like, this man like served with our military. Do you support deporting this man? As kind of like a
Mhm.
ambush to one of Trump's administrative officials. And then if you look into that guy's history, the deportation order was from Obama. That deportation order was put in from Obama because of like breaking a bunch of some laws regarding cocaine, like possession or smuggling or something along those lines. And since then, again, the deportation order since Obama, it has not been enforced up until just like a year ago or within the last year when he chose to self-deport because of essentially now
Mhm.
there's definitely more of a process of deporting people. They left out all those details. They left out all the details of actually he was ordered for deportation under Obama, who I thought
Mhm.
we all were a big fan of, maybe not, for breaking a law, even if regardless of whether you think that should be a law or not. Uh, and it hasn't been it hasn't been properly effectuated for how long? For 20 years?
Yeah. It's some of this stuff is truly wild, like, in the immigration context. Like, I don't know if you saw this Fifth Circuit case that came out where apparently for 30 years the federal government has taken the position that if you're detained at the border, you generally speaking don't get bail and you're detained. But if you bypass the border and and this goes to your point, and were detained inside the country, you generally get bail. So you get better treatment for having evaded the border. And then, of course, because you're the type of person who evaded the border, you're also the type of person who, when granted bail, doesn't show up again. So, so to your point, like, how do they not? How does this guy be in the country so long? It's like, well, he was probably on bail. Like, there's these crazy ass practices that just don't make any fucking sense. And then, like, if you don't grant bail, if it's like, okay, and like the thing about whether you're here legally or illegally is it's normally pretty cut and dry. Like there's fringe cases, but normally it's not a
Normally,
hard thing to prove one way or
right.
the other. So okay, you detain someone, they can't prove that they're supposed to be here legally. It's pretty obvious what the situation is. You hold them no bail while they do their hearings. Well, how does the story end? They self-deport, as you were referencing. Because why the fuck would you stay in detention for a year when you could get the government's going to give you $2,600 in a plane ticket?
Yeah.
right? So then suddenly the immigration system works again because you don't have to do a year and a half of hearings on everybody because they're self-deporting. But if they could go out on bail and hang out in the country, like why not? They'll get some lawyer who's working pro bono, and we'll just like slow the whole process down, and they'll have fun.
No. No, I, as usual, Ryan, pretty reasonable takes overall.
You know what? I think I'd like to think so, but I have found, and I think actually Pisco even said this recently,
Uh-oh.
that I think and I don't know if you have this experience, I think I piss people on the left off more when I speak to them than like even someone like Rob Noor does. Like, like someone who's like gonna kind of into like, Admiral Gibbs, someone who's gonna play into like the MAGA
Oh,
thing.
definitely MAGA, or definitely Admiral. Yeah, Admiral Gibbs has enough kayfabe that I think that they appreciate that actually.
Yeah, yeah. I think that what did Pisco say? He like he said this to Josiah when he was crying about our how the last debate went. He said, how, I want to make sure I say this right. It's like he I think he accused me of like hiding my politics under the guise of analysis.
Mm,
You know what I mean? Where it's like, and I find that's the way it goes. It's like it couldn't possibly be like it couldn't possibly be that I'm right or that I have a reasoned version thought about this or
yeah.
that even there's room for disagreement. Like if I have a rational perspective on this, or at least it appears to be rational, and I disagree with you politically, it must be because I'm hiding my power level or doing some kind of insidious grift that is the only explanation of it.
This no, I there was this was a while ago, but there was a debate in which I said the phrase, I don't swim in the partisan soup that you swim in, and I got a lot of pushback for that, but I mean it, and I think I really empathize with exactly what you're saying, which is, I have, you know, I have a lot of opinion. This is this last election was the very first time that I voted for a Republican
Mm.
candidate. My understanding is you didn't vote for Trump in
No.
the 2024 election. I did, but the last two times I voted for the Libertarian candidate, and for me this was definitely more of a kind of well, I mean, Kamala Harris, right? There was that sort of analysis going on for me, and you didn't even vote for the Republican candidate in 2024, and so what I think it's very easy. It's very psychologically comforting to think of things in a binary. To think of
Hmm.
things like this is us and that's you, friend enemy distinction, right?
Yeah.
We are on the blue side, you're on the red side, and if you're on like on one side of the line, well, you're still on the red side, so you're still part of that team. As opposed to looking at political movements as being very often messy, multi-segmented, a lot of different groups, a lot of different interests, building coalitions where otherwise there wouldn't be one absent the current political zeitgeist.
Mhm.
And um, when I'm referring to people who are swimming in partisan soup, I'm talking about people who refuse to provide any kind of charity towards the people they're talking to, when they are willing to uh, grant concessions, when they are willing to, explain why they may have voted or taken a certain action a certain way, while also not describing themselves as purely with that side on everything, or entirely with the team kind of mentality. um, I just think it's a very dangerous soup, and I think it's a direct result of the rising polarization in this country. We are now more
Oh.
polarized than we've been in I think since the Civil War. It has been consistently getting worse. More and there's polls out on this where more and more frequently Democrats have less Republican friends and Republicans have less Democrat friends. Fewer people they associate with, fewer people that they respect, and there's this massive drifting gap and just
Mm.
more hatred between the two. And I think that is fueling a lot of the rejection of actually getting into the details and actually trying to analyze something, and instead just almost it almost feels like this sort of paranoid kind of conspiracy, you're one of them, aren't you? No, 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 no. I know you're
Oh,
saying this, Ryan, but this is actually because you're hiding it from me, and you're actually one of them. You're actually one of them, and
oh no,
this is the effect that they're saying.
100%. And by the way, I want to thank, holy shit, the fucking 100 people from Rob Nordstrom that just dropped in. So
Whoa!
thank you guys. Thank you guys. Welcome to the party. If people are here from Rob's, show off our fabulous emotes to make them jealous. They can see the wonders of the fence and the peace go crying emote. So this is this is things that they'll appreciate. But thank you all. Welcome. But no, I mean, Lackroyd, you're
You were saying
100%
good
right.
things about Rob earlier, so
Yeah, we were talking nice about Rob. But no, I think you're 100% right. I think that there's a Thomas Sowell wrote about this. There's this thing that happens on the left where they believe that there's one true opinion, and what they mean by that is it's what we're talking about with the Bergerfeld, like my reasoned judgment. Well, your reasoned judgment can only be a sufficient reason to change the Constitution if there's only one right opinion,
right.
right? Because if there was more than one right opinion, that would not be a good reason. That would be a very bad reason to think that you can amend the Constitution. And I think on the left, they have this belief that if only people were right and good and smart enough or educated enough or sincere enough, surely you would agree with them.
If they were as smart as me, then of course they would have the right
Yeah.
opinion.
So then if you don't agree with them, you must either be stupid or
Or lying.
uneducated or grifting, right? That's what it is. And it it bleeds out in really unpleasant ways, right? And I think this is why we've seen like it's not possible for them to for the modern left to say something like, "Oh, we disagree with the way president's using ICE, but we're not going to like follow around law enforcement officers and blow whistles in their ears and kick out their taillights." Like, because like it's not enough to say that we disagree. It's that they are wrong and insincere and grifting,
Right.
and therefore deserving of our scorn and our retribution in some way. And I think it's really dangerous. And the right, for all its foibles, and the right has a lot of foibles. I'm not trying to whitewash any of that shit, but I don't think the right does that in the same way, or at least not all the time. It's starting to, which I worry about. But I think that
Some right,
there's
some
a
sections, yeah.
I think there's still a sense on the broader right of shared American values. And I think on the left, they've largely replaced those values with something else. Like I don't think that I think if you ask them about like natural rights or like life, liberty, pursuit, and happiness, or objective morality, they would tell you that those things are like outdated nonsense that old white men believed in.
Right.
And then it's kind of like, well, oh shit, well, that puts us kind of up shit's creek. Like, I don't think we share a moral value set anymore. And if we don't share a moral value set, how the fuck are we supposed to coexist? That's not an easy problem to solve.
It's not one of the. I think one of the areas where this comes out that's most troublesome, in my opinion, and because look, I'm a big free speech guy. I like the idea of people being able to have differing opinions and being able to speak different opinions. Big fan. But one of the areas that really makes me uncomfortable, especially regarding what you just said, which is you can't rely on the Constitution to protect you from everything, especially when you have a jury system. Um, I every single time we have a case. So for me, one of the big kind of moments was the Kyle Rittenhouse case,
My God,
um,
yeah.
where first of all, I don't even think they should have gone to trial, but you know, but following the verdict, which I thought was obvious after looking at the evidence, right? And initially, I was like, hey, I'm gonna see what all the evidence was before I jump to conclusions, right? Before we'd all jump in and say it was. Of course, everybody else, wasn't
Mhm.
doing that. They were jumping in and saying, oh, he shot 14 black people on the streets. Yeah, okay, well, let's
Yeah,
wait until the facts
with
come
an
in.
illegal gun he crossed
Yes,
state lines with. Yeah.
with an illegal machine gun, Ryan,
Mhm.
with a machine gun, of course. And all of that turned out, a lot of that, uh, All of that turned out to be BS. um, Even the gun charge, which I'll be honest, I thought he was actually might going to get dinged with, that got thrown out because what the definition of a short barreled rifle wasn't clear enough, and so that was thrown out. And he was found not guilty. Three-fourths of Democrats, when polled by I think it was YouGov, immediately following the verdict, thought he should have been convicted.
Yeah.
Three
Based on
fourths,
what?
right? Well, yeah, they wouldn't be able to tell you. But three-fourths, and so just think about this for a second, right? I'm sharing a country, and potentially, depending on where I live, because jury pools are going to depend on where you live. If I live in an area, I could have a jury made up of people with that thought in their head that think that one of the most obvious cases of self-defense is not self-defense.
Yeah.
That makes me scared to live there. That makes me scared because I'm going to be judged by, potentially I could be judged by these people. If I'm attacked and I have to defend myself, uh, yeah, obviously there's like a range, like reasonable self-defense is important. You can't just like go around murdering people. Hey, I'm defending myself. Obviously not. But there is like a range of judgment call that I'm hoping that I I kind of share an intuition with my community about, and I'm concerned that that might change. And I'm concerned that there's areas of this country that are shifting rapidly to where I can't rely on what I thought was reasonable, where I can't defend myself without
Mhm.
potentially a jury being stacked with people who think that I'm guilty just because I happen to bring a gun to a protest, right?
Well, and this is why I get, like one of the common criticisms I get is that people be like, oh, Ryan like betrayed the left or like whatever because of DEI or because of culture wars or like they try to reduce it to some, like meme to make it seem less serious. But this is the point that you're making, and I think you articulated beautifully. There has been a broader progressive project, and I'm going to use the word progressive instead of communist because I'm trying to be using acceptable language, let's say, to make this something I think even they would agree with, that for 100 years has been pushing a change to American ethos through the education system
Hmm.
and through cultural capture,
Yes.
right? It's not even it's not even really a question. Like it's just like an established historical fact. Like this was the goal of progressive education was to mold the citizens of tomorrow, right? Rather than to teach them the skills and let them find their own way. Like that, it was a change in approach, and it's been bearing fruit for 100 years or so. And it runs very contrary to traditional values and to traditional American values. And a lot of people now don't share those values. They just don't. And it makes it very hard to coexist, to trust them on a jury pool, to think that you're to be optimistic when you get too far down this road, because America as a nation doesn't have like a single religion
Right.
or a single ethnicity to fall back on. Like we all know what it means to be Japanese, but America actually does have this propositional component where you have to believe in the American philosophy to be an American. So if people start fucking with what the American philosophy is, they're actually undermining the existence of the country on some level because that is who we are. So what do you do about that? Like what do you do about that? And that's my favorite. There's so much stuff I criticize Trump for, but my favorite thing about Trump is that he has been the only person I've seen who has actually made inroads in rolling the shit backwards. Not always in the way I appreciate, but when it's like not just pausing it, but actually like doing damage to it. Where it's like you think about like where DEI was under the Biden years and where it is now. I mean, we were really close to instituting racism under law
Yeah.
under Biden. Like there was some crazy shit that was happening. Like there was the Biden administration was pushing for a DEI quota on any company listed on Nasdaq,
Yeah. Yeah. And
right?
and the EEOC was off. They were
All over the place.
wild.
They were giving COVID grants on the basis of race. Like
Yeah.
there was wild stuff that was happening, and it was all fine from this kind of new morality. right? But if you have anything resembling a classic American morality, you're like, it's like the mental gymnastics meet. You're like, oh no, racism is bad and illegal, so you can't just give money only to black people. That would be a problem. Just like if you were giving money only to white people, that would be a problem. Like this isn't complicated. It's very very simple. But I don't know. Like I think that this culture war thing is actually a very big deal. It is
Yeah.
like really a fight for, like you were saying, the jury pool for the heart and soul of the country. And I think it's a fight that actually has to be won.
Yeah. No. And this, yeah, this point specifically of the culture war, which I think has a negative connotation, and I've said repeatedly on multiple different panels on this specific question, I think the culture war actually does matter. Where people will say, "Oh, we don't want to distract the voters with." Usually people who have their own culture war agenda. Okay. But they're just saying like, no, you don't get distracted with like culture war bullshit. Focus on very specific, economic metrics, which are important. I'm not saying they're not important. Um, but I've always thought the culture war does matter because culture matters.
Mm.
What does it mean to be an American? What does it mean to have a society, right? Like, the, is a society not something that isn't cultured? Is it not? Is culture not the programming of a people's? Is it not who we are? Um, and so, yeah, if you, of course it matters. Of course it matters to care about, yeah, like you said, a shift in American culture to be okay with brazen racism. Are we okay with that?
Yeah, is
I,
that fine?
is that fine? I'm not. I'm not okay with that. And I want to point out, like, you said this earlier about Trump being one of the few, or I think you said the only, or one of the few, to really be able to push back on a lot of this, like progression, a lot of the DEI progression. And I didn't think about it that way as much before, but the more I've been kind of like that, that's been lingering on me throughout while we've been talking. And yeah, I think you're right. I think that is one of his achievements here,
Hmm.
which is that uh, that was going too far, and it was going too far on things that what is it, like 80% of Americans were like, hey, the sports thing, right?
Yeah,
Maybe that's like too far, but still, like that was getting pushed. It's like,
yeah. There's
where are we at? Really, where are we at?
literally no end to it, right? And I think that it was the ultimate. We were talking about kind of about this like hive mindy one true opinion vibe, and that's what it was. It's this belief that like there is nothing about America that is enduring. Like it can be remade into this image,
Yeah.
and that everyone should be fine with it because trust us, we know best. And it's deeply un-American, and also it reeks of hubris. And I think that they did go too far. Like the like trans and sports stuff, I think was like an obvious one. Trans prison, that's an obvious one. Like
That one
like
was.
you're starting to see the medical malpractice cases coming in for the
I saw
detransitioners.
that.
Yeah,
That's crazy. That's gonna change
that's gonna be
things.
huge. Yeah,
No.
but like it. I know a dear friend of mine who's like he's a lifelong Democrat. He does not want to vote Republican. He might start, but he doesn't want to. And here's how he said it. He's
Fair
like,
enough.
I've never thought about being a single issue voter before, but if the issue is should we chop kids' dicks off, I'm a no. I'm a no vote on should we chop kids' dicks off. And it's like, oh, like that is how you make a single issue voter, right? And like there are some issues that people just won't budge on. And I do think that the border may become one of those, or stay one of those, because the more I think about it, I can't figure out Biden's border policy. Like, do you see the New York Post had a story that he got a memo from his own team that said his policy would be cause chaos and be a political disaster.
Yeah.
So, like, he was told this wasn't going to work, and he did it anyway. Like, why? I can't. I mean, I can't figure that out. He must have thought there was some political advantage to it, but I can't, for the life of me, figure out what that was without putting on some like sinister tinfoil hat type logic.
I think part of it was like to distinct, like there's like I have to distinguish myself from. I think that's
Hmm.
part of it. But I also think that there's like fine lines that I think people have to tread sometimes, on all sides of the political aisle, really. And one of the fine lines I think that, and this came up during the 2024 campaign when it came with Kamala, was she had in 2019 filled out a questionnaire with the ACLU
Mm.
indicating that she was fully on board with state subsidizing or trans surgeries for illegal immigrants that were detained within the United States. So the government would pay for people's transitions while they were being detained for illegally immigrating within to the United States, which means that anybody in the world who wanted to get a free transition, I suppose, would just need to jump the border.
Fill out an asylum application. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and that became like a talking point against her on the campaign trail. So she didn't bring it up again, but she couldn't walk it back,
Nope.
because if she walked it back, now she's alienated a large part of her voter base, right? Not just the people within that community, but also their supporters that are very strongly their supporters. So she can't walk it back, but she really also can't push it because it's not
It's fucking
popular.
insane. It's She can't push it because it's fucking insane, Lactoid.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, yeah.
It's an insane policy.
That's
Yeah.
the reason. That's ultimately the reason. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a much better way of trying. I was trying to be very, very charitable in my language, but no, it's because it's fucking insane. Exactly. And so there's this fine line of strategic ambiguity. Is Taiwan really? Taiwan's kind of independent, but we're not going to say it.
Mm.
Yeah, this is kind of crazy, but we're not going to say it. Um, there's this fine line of ambiguity happening, and I think to some regards, Biden's policy on immigration was sort of similar, where you know, I think it was he had more of no policy than an actual policy at all,
Mm.
and he knew that, and then but he can't really be super clear about what's happening, because if he is super clear, it's like unworkable, right? Oh, we're just not going to enforce this. You can't say that. You might be doing it, but you can't say it.
So there's this thing, not to, maybe I'm going philosophy bro at the risk of going doing that after law bro and being totally insufferable, but there's this kind of like ambiguous broken utilitarianism that I get from the left, like kind of this like vague empathy plus harm reduction is good.
Yeah.
And I've seen this in debates that I've been on, or even like Louis C.K. on Joe Rogan. He said this, where he was like, I think we should open the borders and then people will come here and it's really bad where they are and it's like better here. And after they come here, it'll be worse here, but it'll be like more fair. Right. And it's like, um, yeah, and there's this, it's this odd sense that you shouldn't maybe back up and be even more philosophy bro. It's this kind of Kantian thing where you measure how noble you are by whether or not you're doing something that doesn't benefit you. Like it would be better to fly to Guatemala and help people build houses than it would be to like go down to your neighborhood soup kitchen
Yeah.
and help people in your community. Because if you help someone here, you might benefit from it. But
It's sacrificial.
if you went somewhere where you don't know anybody, look
Right.
how noble you are, right?
Right.
And I think that worldview is fucking. I don't think it's workable. Like I think it's like it's like a civilizational level threat on some level
The,
because you have to. It's just human nature. Like I want to make my neighborhood better, and I'm willing to donate and my time and money to my town because my kids go to school here, right? And it's motivating. And like, there's nothing wrong with preferring to make my town better than to make some town I'll never go to better. There's nothing wrong with preferring to benefit your countrymen over people you don't know and have no connection with. It's a very weird worldview to think otherwise.
no, I agree. There's like sort of a quasi, almost like dogmatic kind of quasi religious form of like pen, I do not know how to pronounce this word. I've only read it. Uh, penitence, right? Like
Yeah, penitence. Yeah.
yeah, I need to suffer, right? I need to suffer in order to atone for my sins of being born an American. There's a negative connotation to it as opposed to a positive connotation.
Yeah, for sure. I'm posting this without comment, but it's a theory. uh, I've been reminded, if you don't mind doing a little super chat
Oh, go
roundup, because
ahead.
I'm way behind.
Yeah, go ahead.
Um, so James, who has given us another great, you're paying me to give an answer. This was a reversal of the Defensive Marriage
Awesome.
Act from the mid '90s that defined marriage as a man and a woman at federal level, and states did not have to recognize other states' gay marriage. Yeah, which is what a Bergefell, which we were talking about earlier, was pushing back against. And again, for those rating over from Rob's channel, I still don't understand why the federal government needs to be in the marriage business. Like, I think,
Agreed.
like, talk about over-regulation. Like, what could be a more local issue? Like, let states disagree. We're at our best when we have some federalism. My God, James with another 9.99. I don't understand how Congress can delegate its legislative authority. I don't understand how all in all legislative powers doesn't mean all. You want to take a stab at that one? Put you on the spot. If not, I can ramble.
So my philosophy on this, it's going to be a little bit unpopular because I have never truly fully understood why, as long as Congress maintains the capacity to pull back whatever that they delegate, as long as they maintain that unilateral
Mhm.
authority, I don't know. I don't. I'm not a super. I don't think, at least, unless you can move me, I'm a super big fan of the non-delegation
Mhm.
doctrine. Um, again, as long as the power at the end of the day rests within the structures. Now, of course, you could. I guess the counter argument would be, well, over time, this can lead to one branch hollowing out due to like a lack of will, and then effectively we're like moving into like a two branch government or a one branch government. Okay, that's a fair enough argument, but I mean, there's plenty of things that Congress can tell the president. I, tariffs being one of them, where, hey, if we say that, make it very clear that you can do this, even though it is within our
Mhm.
exclusive authority to tax, but us doing this in the way that we're talking about here would just be inefficient, unworkable. You can do it, but subject to what we say. I don't know. I think that
Yeah,
makes sense.
I don't have a problem with delegating legislative authority other than the core legislative authority. Like, I think there's some, like, you couldn't delegate promulgating law, right? You could delegate regulations, but not the law itself, right? Like, there's some
There,
minimal level,
there's some
but
gray area there too, a
yeah,
little bit though.
yeah. But I will say I'm okay with it, because in a world where the president has almost unilateral firing power over agencies. What my problem is not congressional delegation. It's that if they're delegating the power to the president, they have to delegate it to the executive. They can't delegate it to a fourth branch of government that
Yeah,
is unaccountable to anybody, right?
yeah,
Like, especially if it has an executive component to it, right? Where it's like it's going out and enforcing. It's like the SEC or something like this. So I think that like part of the reason why we started seeing major questions popping up and non-delegation popping up is because the agency glut has gotten so crazy, and there was this unelected bureaucracy wielding tremendous power that was generally unaccountable. But I suspect not for much longer. I suspect Trump is probably going to win the Slaughter case, and I
I think
think
so.
yeah, I think probably we're going to have the president have firing power very broadly in the near future.
Yeah, I mean, and that's, we already have precedent in which, I mean, in the Trump immunity case, the majority decision was very clear. The executive branch is the only branch that is made up of one person, right?
Yep.
I mean, that's, I think, a direct quote from that case, maybe a little bit of a paraphrase, but they specify this is a branch made up of one person, um, which it is. So,
It is, and I think that's fine, because then delegation has a cost, right? Congress might be a little bit more loath to delegate something if they're delegating it to the president rather than delegating it to a power structure they've created for themselves,
right.
which I think that's different, and I think that's fine. We already did this one, James, but you've just been so generous. I want to put it up there again. Totally agree. That's a funny take. Um, James again. Jesus, James. Of course, some random district court would give enemy country standing against Orange Man.
He is the
So
ultimate. He is the ultimate enemy, though, right? I mean,
yeah,
so
for the Rob Raiders, and if you're a Rob Raider, consider getting a membership so you too can do a peace go crying emote. If nothing else, I mean, come on. So yeah, it's a pretty fucking funny emote.
it is.
So the hypo we were talking about is if we were being invaded by a foreign country, who would run to which district court to get a universal injunction? And I think that might come up. Grassroots with the 5. Thank you, buddy. Does the Sixth Amendment issue on the self-deportation at some point? Almost never. Almost never. Because famously, it's a misdemeanor at most to be in the country unlawfully. So almost no deportation hearings are criminal. So the Sixth Amendment right to a lawyer doesn't apply in most of them. There are some deportation hearings, like if you're a multiple time offender, that become criminal, at which point you would have the right to a lawyer. Now, if you're choosing to self-deport, that kind of bypasses the whole process. Now, I guess there might be a Venn diagram where somebody has a criminal charge against them and they're opting to self-deport, where it might come into play. But I actually don't know if those people are eligible for self-deportation. Like if we have a felony charge against you, I don't know if we just let you leave at that point.
I
Like
think
we might not.
I think so. And the only reason I think so is because the example that I brought up before, the guy who had the deportation order because of the felony
Mhm.
cocaine possession, he self-deported, and so
It's possible. Yeah, I mean, I would hope if it was like drug possession, maybe yes. If it was like murder, no. Right? Like you think at a certain point we're not like, oh, I killed a guy, then the government gave me $2,600 and a plane ticket to escape. That seems like a not great outcome.
no, I
But
agree. But I was thinking about this. Unless it was deporting for murderers, and I will say this just about like murderers and like child offenders, not offenders who are children, but you know what I'm talking about.
mhm.
Um, I I would be okay. Like we can just send them to CCOT, right? I mean, I think it makes sense. We have the all clear to send to to send with contracts we have with third countries. So I mean, I think CCOT for those kind of offenders, I'd be okay with.
But like for very serious offenders.
Yeah, for very
But
serious offenders.
do you have to prove it first that they? That's the question, right? Because like one of my concerns
Yeah,
about
I
using
think you do.
like the deportation as like a punishment
Yeah,
is that the reason it's a civil offense, and people talk about
right,
this like it's not illegal. It's like the reason that it's a misdemeanor and not a felony is because we don't want to have to do a full criminal trial to do a
right,
deportation,
right,
right?
right.
It's a due process limitation.
Yeah,
So
trial first before CCOT. Yes,
yeah,
I can immediately see the pitfall. Yeah, yep.
yeah, if you're using it as a punishment, I think you probably would have to have a trial.
Yeah, yeah,
But then you got a fan liking the Nikki flag. Not gonna lie.
yeah. I was asked about whether or not there was one. I looked on Amazon. You literally just go to Amazon and just type in Nicki Minaj American flag. First
Mhm.
result, what was it, like five,
Yeah.
$6?
My resident ANCAP brother, Casimir
What's up,
Freeman.
Casimir?
The Fed is the cause of the majority of losses alleged from the boats. The war on drugs is a cattle corral, a distraction from the unseen yoke. What I love, first of all, Casimir, I appreciate chatting with you, and I liked having you on stream the other day. I hope we get to do it again sometime. And also, given your beliefs, the fact that you're willing to give me $5 to express your opinion makes, it fills my heart with fervor. So I appreciate you, buddy. I mean, look, um, the war on drugs is a tricky thing, right? Like, if you're talking about like, should the government control various products? I think we might have some kind of libertarian adjacent agreement. But then stuff like fentanyl, that's tough, right? Because and this is probably where you and I are going to have disagreements. But I don't know. We can talk about it sometime. Like, I, the problem with fentanyl in particular is that like when you have an information asymmetry where it's like I thought I was buying coke but it had fentanyl in it, now I'm dead, right? You like the consequences are so vast and the motivation for the seller to hide information from you is so total that I don't I that doesn't strike me as a easy spot for a free market solution. If there is one, I'm not sure what it is. I don't know. I know, Lacto, you lean even harder libertarian than I do.
I do. I want to give Casimir a quick twofer, if that's okay.
Yeah.
There's another comment that he put down that I'm kind of going between chats. I caught. I found it to be entertaining. He also Casimir said I need evidence that those drug runners were not anarcho-capitalists, because, and this was in regards to whether or not they should be. It's
Mhm.
okay, I guess, for them to be bombed or not. Um, Something about performative contradictions or something along those lines. Um, Now, my opinion on drugs is probably much more libertarian than most people. Um, I think on a legal level, I think this, I'm skeptical that the federal government even has the authority to launch the war on drugs, because I don't think Wickard versus Filburn was good law.
Mhm.
So I also think that the Supreme Court's been very contradictory when it comes to the war on drugs, when they are okay with criminalizing drugs unless that drug happens to be birth control. And it's not been explained to me how there's a privacy interest if the drug is progesterone, right? Griswold versus Connecticut.
Mhm.
But then there's no privacy interest if it happens to be cocaine, right? Don't I have so? And I think when you read Griswold, the logic is, well, we don't want cops going into houses and searching bedstands looking for these birth control pills. That was the logic of the case. We don't
Mhm.
want, like, if we ban birth control, these cops are going to be going into people's houses looking for this stuff. We can't have that. Does this not apply to all controlled substances? I think it does. So I think the court honestly has been pretty inconsistent historically regarding this question. I don't think Wickard versus Filburn is good law, so I don't think the federal government really has the authority to be launching the war on drugs in the way they've been doing. Um, Maybe there's much probably a much stronger argument when it comes to like transporting the drugs in between states and drugs coming into the country, of course, from
Yeah,
outside the country.
across the border would be the
Across the
spot where they have the
border,
most power.
they
Yeah.
have the most power for sure. But then obviously, like a meth lab with entirely within one state, I think that'd be a lot more difficult for the federal government. Um, and honestly, I'd be okay with the legalization of all drugs. The one that gives me pause is fentanyl, for the exact reason that you said, which is that it not only can it be, but it so often is slipped into other drugs, or even non-drugs, and kills people without them even knowing or consenting to the risks of taking that substance. I think there's an argument to be made that because of that, it is perhaps closer to a bioweapon than it is to a recreational substance. And where that line is, I don't know. There is a line though, and if you go into the realm of this is a bioweapon that people are unintentionally taking and dying because of it, right? Like if I was sneaking in ricin across the border and
Mhm.
sneaking into people's cereal, yeah, this is like a national security threat at this point. Of course, you should be able to come get me. Um, but I can also imagine, okay, well, what about a perfectly safe fentanyl lab? It's regulated and monitored by the government, and they're not putting it in unintentional products, and the only people that get it are the people who absolutely know that there's fentanyl inside of it. Unpopular opinion. I'm perfectly willing to have people disagree with me, but I think I'm okay with that being legalized under that narrow circumstance. But any kind of imports, no.
Yeah, so this is where it gets. This is where the rubber hits the road on these hard ones, right? Because it's is it should we be criminalizing the good or the act, right? Like, is it like the mixing, right? Because the problem with limiting it to the mixing is that it's real hard to police that on the borders such that people can trust the information they receive because like a free market solution does rely on people having good information, and
Mm-hmm.
normally
Yes.
sellers are motivated to give good information to buyers because it affects their reputation and their livelihood long term. But if you're selling a product that you can enhance its addictiveness by mixing in something that's dangerous and that the buyer would not want. But once they've ingested it, the odds of them having an addictive reaction such that they must rebuy. Like
Yeah,
this
it's
is
tough.
getting into a territory that I think is tough to defend on free market principles, though I generally defend most things on free market principles. So yeah, I think these are the very toughest cases for sure.
Fentanyl's the hardest bullet for me to bite. Like I'll be honest, like I don't think fentanyl is good in any which way. As I'm sure, like I'm sure plenty of people, maybe you have. I'm sure I know I have for sure. Plenty of people in our audiences definitely have. I'm sure. Lost people to drugs, whether it be through
Mm-hmm.
just straight dying or whether it be through essentially losing them to addiction, which is real and happens. I think this stuff is horrific. I think fentanyl in particular is horrific. It's turning people into zombies. It's crazy. I think that the people who push this, I have huge problems with them. But it's for me, there's like very strong competing principles at play, and one of my principles very strongly is, um, I mean, this is my body. You know, I think there's a stronger argument that this is my body than when it comes to the abortion argument, right? Arguably, there's another body, right? So
Yeah,
I am in favor of restrictions on abortion when it comes to that because there's somebody else. But with me alone, there's not. I'm sorry. Yeah, it's a tough position,
yeah,
but
it's a tough one. Yeah. No, but we definitely gave a $50 answer to a $5 super chat. So
he
congratulations,
picked the
Casby
right topic.
Freeman.
He picked the right topic.
You're the winner. You've won the super chat roulette. And then Grassnet Root's last one. I find you profoundly undramatic, and that's why I like you. If I want chaos, I watch Sean. Someone clip this and send this to Sean. Someone, because I think Sean would appreciate this. I think this captures Sean's vibe well and the joys of Sean's stream. If you don't know Sean, potentially criminal, he's a very fun watch, and his stream is delightful, delightful chaos. It is a very different vibe. Okay, man. Well, I am going to start wrapping up. I don't know how
Yeah.
much longer you have. I don't want to keep
No,
you
this
all
works.
night.
This
Yeah,
works.
but I don't know. Closing thoughts. What do you think comes next in the wide world of law and politics? Where are you at these days?
Yeah. So where am I at? I think the biggest things coming up for me that I'm just keeping an eye on is the midterms coming up. I'm, as is the case with the vast majority of all of historical precedent, the other party's probably going to win.
Mm-hmm.
Is what it is. If the Democrats don't win the House, it will be like if the Republicans hang on, if they tie it, or if they
Mm-hmm.
hang on by like one, it will have been a tremendous loss for the Democrats. Just horrible destruction if they don't win the House. They are poised to win it. If they don't win it, I think it speaks volumes as to how unpopular they are,
Yeah.
because they should win it. So I'm keeping an eye on that. Another thing that I'm interested in, and I don't know when this is going to happen, but the Supreme Court, I don't know. Do you think Thomas and Alito are going to retire?
Wow.
Keeping an eye on that.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? Because in theory, they should.
Hmm.
In theory, they should, and restock the deck, right? And get some good judges in there. And truthfully, Trump has been excellent at selecting Supreme Court justices, like
Yes, he has.
truly excellent.
Yep.
So I think that would go well. But what's the makeup of the Senate? What does it look like post midterms? Right? Like, I mean, these are big questions. And do they have people on deck? And then also, like, are either of them going to pull a Ginsburg and think that they're immortal and they can make it?
Yeah.
I mean, it would be a big blow to lose either of those guys. And then, like you imagine the court gets recomposed. Like, and honestly, this is the court composition is turning me into a single issue voter. It would be very, very difficult for me to imagine even being neutral in upcoming elections when court composition's on the line, because the disparity's gotten really vast. Like, I mean, I
It was my
we
biggest issue.
we could do it. We could do a whole stream on this, but Justice Jackson, like, I every time I read what she writes or
Yeah,
hear her talk, I'm just like, what the fuck is happening?
yeah.
And like, it's wild, some of the stuff that she's doing. And there was a case in Casa. Um, it went up to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court ordered the lower court to comply, and the lower court didn't, and cited the dissent and said, we're doing this other thing. And it went back up, of course. And the Supreme Court said, no, obviously you have to follow our orders. You're a lower court. Like, like, how is this a thing? Why are we even talking about this? Right. And like, somehow Jackson and Sotomayor dissented. Kagan, to her credit, was like, I think the majority's wrong on birthright
But
citizenship. I think,
you
but you got to follow the order. Like, like, but like,
yeah.
it's wild. And then she wrote a dissent that basically, I mean, she was just arguing for judicial maximism. She came out and said, like, if there's anything illegal, the court has the power to declare it so. Right? There's no separation of powers limitations. There's no areas where the court like shouldn't intrude. If it is illegal, the court has the power to correct. It was the craziest maximalist overreach opinion I've ever seen. Like, I it was breathtaking in the way that she was articulating it, to the point where, like, I don't know if you remember reading this opinion, but like, Justice Barrett was writing for the majority, and she spent an unusual amount of time being snarky about the dissent, to the point where when I was reading it, I was like, "Oh, Barrett, you can't go this hard on a dissenter. Like, it's kind of bad form for a majority opinion." Like, at one point, she was like, "You are wrong. See Marbury v. Madison." Like, it's like really, like, very, very snarky. And then I was like, "There's no way that was warranted." And then I read the dissent and was like, "Oh."
It was actually pretty light. It was
Yeah, she was being quite nice about the whole thing.
yeah. No,
Disaster.
the court composition, not just in the Supreme Court, but also judge appointments, was probably the single biggest motivating factor for me in 2024.
Yeah, I could see that, and it seems to be getting worse. And I kind of there've been a few very alarming decisions I've read, so it's hard not to see that. Well, Lactoid, where can people find you to hear your brilliant legal advice and political acumen? Where can they find you, buddy?
Yeah, no, they can find me at Lactoid TV on Twitch, Twitter, and YouTube. And I also want to say, for those of you in my audience, I have Ryan's YouTube link pinned. So give him a click and give him a follow or a subscription, I guess, with YouTube. And no, it's always a good chatting with you, and we'll continue the fight.
Yeah, man. It's always good to have you on here. Go support Lactoid wherever all the places you can find him. Oh, mods, thanks for putting that in chat. And if you are a Rob Nor fan who joined halfway through, all the more reason to click subscribe on my channel. Go over to Twitch, support Lactoid. It is really good for the what I'm going to call, in generous terms, the broader right to find each other and
Yeah.
find these platforms and support each other. It makes a tremendous difference in getting these ideas out there and making sure that, like, the fight can be won. So
Yes.
appreciate all of you. Please do take the time to go support Lactoid, and thank you so much, buddy.
Yeah.
Always a pleasure having you on here.
Yep. You as well. Sounds good.
All right, man. Talk
All
soon.
right. Peace.
All right.
Well, that was just a dandy conversation. Ryan is always a good time to talk to. Ryan Mullally. Check him out. Check him out, everybody. Check him out, homies. Or hold on. Oh, I didn't turn off studio mode. Uh-oh. There we go. Check him out. His YouTube link is pinned. If you haven't checked him out, definitely do it. Ryan is he is I think a very intelligent lawyer. Um, Clearly knows his stuff. He knows a lot of more details about uh, a whole bunch of different things. Yeah, highly recommend him. So, and most importantly, I think he's got a level head and he's reasonable about I think the core issues that are important, which is maintaining the the base level fundamentals of the American Republic. So, no, good shit. Um, I am gonna have to bounce though, friends. So we're gonna raid on out to Gibbs. We are obviously going to be doing the show coming this Monday, but then we're also going to be doing a debate tournament on Wednesday of next week. So tune into that if you want to see. That is going to be with a fellow right winger, Pentuple, who is also a lawyer. He is a right leaning lawyer. He is much more MAGA. So if you're a really big Trump supporter, you're probably might be more on his side. But he's definitely we're definitely aligned in many ways. So tune in for that. It'll be great buckets of fun. And otherwise, I'm going to be rating on out. And I will catch you guys later.